It begins with lines telling the myth of the creation of Eluja Online. On the first day the god created the race of elves from light that flooded the earth, and on the second made flowers bloom everywhere. The girl watches the familiar introductory video, quietly admiring the beauty of the graphics and that warm nostalgia, when suddenly she notices something strange, as if she is falling asleep right during the viewing. The girl suddenly wakes up with a confused look and sneezes loudly, looks around at the strange, dazzlingly bright place and wonders where she is. She stands in the middle of an endless field, completely confused, when she realizes that she seems to have ended up inside the virtual world of Eluja Online. She tries to calm down and thinks that this might be the next quest to change her profession, which she needs to complete. She looks down at the familiar white cloak with cat ears and recognizes in it her avatar, which she has been using for 3 years. She recalls the journey, how in battles together with her teammates they rose to high levels and finally fulfilled her desire to change class to Sage. The system voice joyfully congratulated her on the successful class change, but coldly added that she would have to start over from level 1. She cheerfully accepts this decision, but when the voice asks her to prepare to enter Eluja in the real world, she is wary of this very phrase, and realizing that she is stuck on a new map and nothing is happening, she decides to move forward herself to trigger the quest. Confidently summons her Mount Ellie to move faster, but the summon does not work at all, and she is shocked and worried could she have ended up in a zone where mounts are forbidden. Then she tries to open the map and the guild chat window, but nothing in the system works, and she screams in despair when she realizes she will have to go on foot. After an exhausting walk, breathing heavily, she suddenly hears the approaching sound of hooves. From afar, a squad of riders in shining armor rushes towards her, frightening her. She quietly rejoices as if finally a quest has appeared, and the knights, seeing a child standing alone in the wild, are clearly embarrassed. The leading knight, so attractive that she admires him like a perfect NPC, asks the girl where her parents are and demands that she state her name. Confused, the girl answers that her name is Kyujo Yuri. The captain thoughtfully repeats the name Kyujo Yuri, not understanding why it sounds so familiar to him. The girl quickly corrects him. She says her name is not Kyujo Yuri, but Kyujo Yuri with a different stress. The knight turns to his comrade Argo and asks if he knows any land called Nihon Japan, but both admit they have never heard of such a name. Yuri begins to worry when she realizes that these NPCs know nothing about real things. When asked about her parents, she gets confused and shows the sage emblem on her neck, proudly stating that she came because she became a sage. The captain sternly examines the emblem and decides to take the girl to their fortress, thinking that her parents might be looking for her there, and says to go together with Argo. Yuri looks at the horse, and fear and curiosity fight within her simultaneously, while Argo gently lifts her onto the saddle. As soon as she settles firmly, she is overwhelmed by incredible delight. She looks at Argo and asks where they are heading, and he answers, to the Fortress Issel, a place she does not remember from Eluja Online. Riding behind Argo, Yuri feels with admiration how realistic the world is, from his sensations to the nightly natural conversations, and thinks that if this is a quest, then it is eerily vivid. Suddenly, Argo announces that a fortress has appeared before them, drawing her attention to the sturdy stone structure towering among the hills. The scene shifts to an abstract space. Water droplets float around. Yuri begins to have philosophical thoughts about waking from a dream and where the boundary lies between reality and illusion. She sees her mother's figure who woke her in the familiar room, but this feeling slowly fades. The girl Yura suddenly wakes up and sits on a simple bed in an unfamiliar room under a wooden ceiling she has never seen before. She realizes she fainted and quietly wonders how unfamiliar this ceiling is. She convinces herself, in Eluja Online, characters sometimes lose consciousness, but their bodies still move instinctively, yet this time it feels as if she has truly fallen into a deep sleep. To check if it is a dream, Yuri pinches her cheek so hard that it hurts and tears. Real pain shocks her. This is not a dream or a VR game. She trembles before the mirror and through tears and others' objections is forced to accept the bitter truth. This world is reality. Yuri wipes her tears and whispers to herself. It's not time to cry, she needs to calmly think about what she wants to do if this place is real. She clenched her fist and resolutely swore that she wants to return to her old world, but immediately a faint doubt flashed whether it is even possible. The little girl stood before the mirror to check herself and instantly let out a frightened scream, seeing in the glass the face of a sweet little girl, touched the glass to be sure, and then repeatedly smiled and made funny faces, making sure the reflection was her. Yuri begins to agree with the truth and mutters that although she likes the cute character images, actually becoming an 8-year-old child in this world is a huge challenge. She wonders if she can survive in this body and suddenly remembers. If this world is identical to Eluja Online, she can still use game skills. Nervously decides to try a command to open the system status panel. Suddenly, a bright information panel appeared before her eyes. Yuri's heart stopped. It really works. It shows her name Kyujo Yuri, age 8 years, and profession Sage level 1. Her HP and MP stats and all skills magic, healing, alchemy are at 100, and she is momentarily stunned before daring to believe it. Yuri carefully studies the status panel and notices. Although the stats are a bit low, they correspond to the first level, and she feels calmer knowing that as a sage she has both offensive and healing skills. But her gaze lingers on the title Lost from Another World, and she silently understands that this confirms she is a stranger torn from her former world. She continues to try other system commands, call them up, bring out Ellie, log out of the account, or open a chat channel with friends, but receives only absolute silence. No response. Realizing that only the status panel works, Yuri falls to the floor in boundless sorrow and bursts into sobs, mourning her mother and fearing she will never see her again. A sudden knock on the door scared her. She turns and sees the captain entering the room and asking if she has fully woken up yet, and seeing the girl with tears in her eyes. Two companions behind him, Argo and the knight, rush up and anxiously ask if she is injured or did the captain scare her. Yuri quickly waved her hand, as if saying that she was just lost in thought and not angry at the captain, and the tension dissipated. The captain slid her a cup of juice from the fruit of the Luco and advised her to drink it to calm down. Yuri takes the cup with curiosity. He has never heard of this fruit and quietly worries whether it will taste strange. After a sip, Yuri surprisingly feels a light sweetness and a delicious aroma of the drink, which immediately lifts her mood. Seeing her smile, Argo smiled back and teased the captain, saying that he had accidentally scared the child again. As soon as Yuri calmed down, the captain solemnly introduced himself Leon, commander of the Border Knights and lord of the island fortress, and with a serious expression asked permission to ask her a few questions to clarify the situation. Leon asks directly if she is really from the Kingdom of Japan and why she appeared alone in this wilderness. Yuri is pale and also craves answers. Yuri, stammering, says that although Leon will not believe it, she was in her room and suddenly woke up here in the wild. Leon listens thoughtfully and decides that by her clothes and language Yuri seems like a daughter of a noble family who accidentally got into trouble. The girl feverishly denies that she is noble, thinking to herself that she is actually 19, not 8, as her body suggests. Leon gently strokes Yuri's head and apologizes for talking about things that are beyond the child's understanding. Suddenly an idea struck Yuri. He jumps up and exclaims, "Tower of the Sage," which made Leon and Argo shudder. Yuri clenches her fists with determination. She believes that if this is the world of Elusia Online, there must be a Tower of Sages here, and hopes that returning to her origins will show the way back to her old world. But as soon as she asked about the location of the tower in the magical forest, Leon and Argo both clearly were stunned. Yuri begins making gestures in the air, checking her inventory for the key to the tower. Leon and Argo look at her in surprise, not understanding what she is doing in the void. Yuri, disappointed, finds that there is nothing important in the inventory, and Leon firmly says that someone as small as her could never go into the magical forest. It is too dangerous there. Argo adds that the monsters in that forest are much stronger than usual. Even the slime is frightening. Yuri confidently says that she will beat the slime, and as soon as she levels up she will easily pass through the magical forest. But in her heart she quietly fears whether her magic really works the same as in the game. Leon approaches closer and seriously asks Yuri what martial arts she knows to be so confident. The girl decisively replies that she can cast spells, and although she is weak now, if she becomes stronger she will be able to defeat anything. Leon stared at Yuri for a long time, and then, as if sighing, decided to temporarily let her into the fortress until a better solution is found. Yuri bowed her head and sincerely thanked them for finally finding a safe refuge. Leon tells Argo to bring Amanda so she can take care of the girl. The commander kneels on one knee to get down to Yuri's eye level, assures her that Amanda loves children and will take care of her, politely extends his hand, and solemnly welcomes Yuri Kujo to the Issel fortress. Yuri beams, and places her small hand in Leon's hand in response to this hospitality. At that moment, a knight with flaming red hair, Amanda, runs into the room. Panic-stricken, tightly hugs Yuri and repeatedly asks if she has fully recovered or if she needs more rest. Amanda squeezes her so hard that Yuri can only say she is fine, and Leon reminds Amanda to watch her strength because Yuri is still a child. Yuri smiles at everyone and quietly promises to do her best as Sage Yuri Kujo, level 1, striving for the Tower of Sages, and the way home. Her journey in this new world officially begins here. The scene changes to a path leading into the forest, and Argo says that since they have reached this area, they will soon come across. Here is their goal. Yuri sits in front of Argo on horseback and curiously asks if slimes really appear in this forest. She thinks to herself that after one stormy day, Argo and Amanda took her out of the fortress so she could finally get real experience. Hearing Yuri excitedly say she wants to go hunt monsters in the magical forest, Amanda instantly became angry and shouted that it is very dangerous to let a child go there. Yuri hurriedly puts on a smile and says she wants to go check her magic. She feels that her memories of this world are foggy, so she needs to test her powers to find clues about her true self. Argo thoughtfully rubbed his chin, acknowledging that Yuri's worries about the future were quite understandable, but still advised the girl not to go alone to dangerous places. Amanda firmly squeezed Yuri's shoulder and said that if she stayed in the fortress, her parents or relatives might come for her, and Yuri anxiously lowered her head, and insisted that she must protect herself and cannot rely on others forever. Yuri raised her sparkling eyes to Amanda and asked if she would go with her and protect her. When the girl gladly answered, yes, the girl blossomed like a flower and exclaimed that with Amanda nearby her strength would grow 100-fold. Yuri's sweet appearance melts both Argo and Amandathi cannot refuse her. While the three of them wandered through the forest, Argo suddenly remembered, pointed to a spot and said, "It was right here that we first found Yuri." He asked the girl if she remembered anything, but Yuri awkwardly looked around and gently shook her head, still remembered nothing. So Argo softly stroked her head and reassured her not to worry too much. Yuri bit her lip out of guilt. It hurt her to keep lying to Amanda and Argo about amnesia, and inside she screamed that in reality she had been transported directly into the very same online game Eluja she once played, and she was actually 19 years old. But she knew that if she revealed this now, it would definitely shock them into unconsciousness, so she decided to remain silent and focused on killing monsters to level up. Yuri ran back and forth and told herself, although she did not know why she ended up here, there must be a reason, and she hoped that by finding it, she would return to her old world. After searching a bit and finding no monsters, Amanda grumbled that usually green slimes appear here in whole hordes, but today they were nowhere to be seen. Yuri naively asked what green slime was, and Amanda was so stunned she thought the girl had forgotten basic things. The knight adjusted her glasses and announced she would give Yuri a brief lesson on types of slime. Amanda pulled out an illustrative board and with a sparkle in her eyes explained. The colors of slimes change depending on what they eat: green from leaves, brown from soil and stones, blue from drinking water, red from fire, and she also whispered legends about rare silver slimes supposedly born from absorbing metal, which no one had ever seen. Yuri looks at Amanda with such admiration, as if seeing a real professor, and when Amanda notices her curiosity, she suggests that after returning to the fortress, she will take her to meet the person who studies slimes, to which Yuri readily agrees. While the company was enthusiastically talking, a shiny slime suddenly appeared on the path, the very one they had just been talking about. Yuri's eyes widen with surprise. She looks at the creature and exclaims excitedly that it is really green, just as Amanda described. Amanda anxiously asks Yuri if she is really ready to meet the monster, and Yuri confidently replies that everything is fine in Eluja online. She had only seen blue slimes, so she wants to try her luck. Yuri takes a simple weapon from her inventory, a wooden cypress staff, looks determinedly, while Argo and Amanda encourage her from behind. Although there is no shame, she thinks she still has to act to level up. Yuri calls the slime to prepare and rushes into attack, striking blow after blow with the staff. A hoko sound is heard when the staff hits its soft body, but the slime seems unaffected and just bounces off like a rubber ball. She keeps swinging all the time, and the two knights loudly cheer. The scene turns out quite funny. After the flurry of attacks, the slime remains indifferent. Yuri is barely breathing from exhaustion. She realizes that her blows have no effect. Argo grabs his head in despair, and Amanda only smiles crookedly to comfort her. Irritated, Yuri wonders why she didn't use magic right away, instead of wasting energy hitting with the staff. In a fit of irritation, she explains that once she dreamed she could arm herself with a wooden staff to enhance her power. But in reality, just swinging a stick at the slime is absurd. Argo strokes her head and says he doesn't quite understand this dream, but obviously such blows won't defeat monsters. Yuri calms down and begins to think about magic, but she is scared. Fire spells could burn the forest, and water spells could make the slime stronger, so she chooses another way. Yuri stands before the slime in a serious pose, concentrates all her MP into the wooden staff, and shouts the name of the skill Thunder Arrow. Suddenly, a powerful electric discharge bursts from the staff, making even her exclaim, "A." In the very spot where the slime stood, a huge lightning bolt struck, causing a terrible explosion of blinding light. The magic strike was so strong that nearby Argo and Amanda covered their faces and were thrown back in complete shock. The explosion raises a suffocating column of dust. Smoldering electric arcs crawl along the ground. Yuri is thrown back. Horror and disbelief at the power she just unleashed are on her face. Two knights only press themselves to the ground to avoid the aftershocks of the destructive attack. As the smoke and dust disperse, a deep crater remains where the slime stood, and around it heavy destruction. Yuri falls to the ground, looks into that hole with wide, stunned eyes and can only choke out Hava. She mentally asks herself, after all, she definitely used Thunder Arrow, the weakest lightning skill, which in the game only slightly paralyzed, so why did it look like a nuclear explosion in reality? Yuri looks at the still smoking crater, her face pale, and she quietly rejoices, lucky that she used it in the forest, not in the island fortress. While Amanda behind is still shocked by the destructive power of the tiny sages. Amanda stands over the deep pit, her face gloomy with anger, presses Yuri and demands an explanation of how such a horror could have happened. And the girl trembles and awkwardly says that she probably just got carried away. Seeing Yuri scratch her head and put on a shy smile to hide the mistake, Amanda's anger only flared and the girl lowered her head and apologized hopelessly. Amanda sighed with irritation, put her hands on her hips and scolded Yuri. Even if it was just a small slime, using such an excessively destructive spell was completely unnecessary. Yuri weakly protests that it really is the weakest skill in her set. But Amanda immediately waved it off and shouted that it's not about strong or weak, it's about the fact that she made a huge hole in the ground. Yuri looks at the smoking crater and nervously sweats, because she herself does not understand how everything got so out of control. Tears well up in Yuri's eyes when the title Extreme Magic User lights up on her status screen, and she blames herself for not foreseeing such terrible power. Because of this, Amanda suddenly interrupts her leveling session and gives her a good scolding. Upset, Yuri walks away with her head down, realizing that she defeated only one slime and still remains at level 1. Argo sees this, forces himself to smile, and suggests the group return to the fortress to report to Captain Leon. As the three were returning, Argo suddenly felt something strange in the thick bushes ahead and instantly rushed to cover Yuri, whispering to her to be very careful. The rustling in the thickets grew louder and louder, and Yuri caught her breath. She gasped in fright. Suddenly, a giant slime the size of a small hill grew before them, blocking the path, and the group froze at the sight of this colossal monster. After a warm meeting with Leon at the island fortress, Amanda leads Yuri to her private room so she can rest for the night, and the girl opens her eyes wide in surprise as she enters the fully furnished female room. Amanda cheerfully explains that there are also female knights in the fortress, so a separate living space was arranged for them. Amanda excitedly pulls out a stack of new clothes and says these are temporary replacements for Yuri. The girl freezes in amazement. Instead of Amanda's old clothes, there are incredibly beautiful dresses. Amanda smiles and explains that all these things. The clothes were handmade by a man named Jorg as a gift after hearing about the lost girl. And Yuri froze in surprise. She couldn't believe that someone could create such exquisite things by hand so skillfully. When Yuri asks who Jorg is, Amanda blushes and shyly says that he is a burly man with a manly beard. Yuri suddenly remembers the tall man who brought her juice earlier, and Amanda enthusiastically tells that Jorg not only looks like a savage, but is also extremely skilled. He sewed all the pillows and bedding in this room himself, and Yuri quietly admires his craftsmanship. Amanda nervously confesses, Jorg is actually an enchanter. He can apply magical seals to equipment to increase protection and resistance, and she says with admiration that he is one of the few who can immediately etch 2 different magical patterns on one item. He is not only a master in his craft, but also a formidable swordsman and a wonderful cook. So Amanda secretly dreams that someday he might become the perfect husband. Seeing how Amanda shines with happiness when talking about her affection, Yuri understands. She is hopelessly in love. Yuri naively asks if they are supposed to be a cute couple, but Amanda suddenly bursts into tears and shouts that actually everything is quite the opposite. She sobs. Although she starts conversations every day and writes love letters, George pays no attention to her and never reciprocates, and Yuri is left speechless by this. To chase away the gloomy mood, Amanda decided to immediately make Yuri try on the new dress. After some fuss, Yuri appears in a snow-white dress with cute ruffled frills, and Amanda exclaims with delight how incredibly sweet she looks. Yuri happily twirled to feel the softness of the dress and quietly thanks Dorg for the wonderful gift. Amanda rushed forward and hugged her, saying that she grew up only with brothers and always dreamed of having such a beautiful little sister like Yuri. Yuri's heart was warmed by the sincere family affection of this female knight. Lying in Amanda's warm embrace on the soft bed, she felt a strange calm in this unfamiliar world and thought to herself that not only Amanda but everyone in Isa Fortress is kind and gentle. Amanda gently soothes Yuri and promises that from now on they will always be together, so don't worry under her good night. Yuri falls into a deep sleep, ending a turbulent day with sweet dreams about the future. I remind you, Yuri's group entered the forest to train but had to stop. Yuri accidentally cast a too powerful spell, and when they were already preparing to return, a strange figure emerged from the bushes, making everyone wary. Yuri shudders and shouts loudly when he realizes that it is not a monster, but a person. An unfamiliar girl in sparkling glasses constantly looks around and mutters that this is strange. She clearly senses something nearby. Yuri freezes and watches as she crawls on the ground, while Argo awkwardly observes this strange behavior. Suddenly, the girl jumps up, approaches Argo, and begins sniffing him from head to toe. The knight froze in shock. After a long sniff, she shouts with disappointment that there is no amazing slime scent at all, grabs Argo by the collar, and with a terrible expression asks if the previous explosion turned everything into smoke and ashes. Demands an immediate explanation of the recent event, and Yuri just stands silently. Amanda quickly runs up to calm Yuri and assures that despite the strange behavior, this is not a bad person, and calls her Karin a slime researcher from the Isil Fortress, whom she mentioned earlier. She asks if the slime is completely gone, and with a terrible expression asks if the previous explosion turned everything into smoke and ashes. She asks if the previous explosion turned everything into smoke and ashes. Karin seems uninterested in greetings. Instead, she wails, mourning the fresh, grassy smell of slime that was killed, while Yuri is shocked by the researcher's slight perversion. Having listened to Argo, Karin crosses her arms and skeptically wonders if a child could cause such destruction, peers into the deep crater and turns to Yuri, asking if she really used lightning magic to destroy the slime. Argo adds that Yuri even used a shortened spell, and this further astonishes Karin because it is a very complex technique. Karin leans closer, looks into Yuri's face, and interrogates who she really is and why she appeared in the fortress. Yuri awkwardly replies that she is just a lost sage. But the answer clearly does not satisfy Karin. Argo has to intervene and explain that Yuri coming here to kill slimes was also a way to test her abilities. Karin waved her hand and cut off. Killing slimes will not make your powers stronger. Yuri naively agreed and suddenly realized an important thing. In this world, things like experience points or level-ups apparently do not work like in games. To become stronger, people must relentlessly train their body and skills every day, just like the knights of the fortress. Suddenly Karin changes her behavior and rushes to Yuri with wide-open, fascinated eyes, bombarding her with questions about the color, shape, and texture of that giant slime they fought, trying to find out if it is a new species, and her excessive enthusiasm scares the whole group. Amanda urgently intervenes and asks everyone to take a break to rest a little and drink some tea. While Amanda was preparing a resting place, Yuri noticed Argo going for water, ran after him with an offer to help, and Argo smiled in gratitude for her enthusiasm. They headed together to a small stream nearby. Yuri quietly felt relieved. Karin no longer questioned her, and it crossed her mind that although the researcher was a bit strange, at least she was not scolded for harming the forest. At the stream, Argo asked Yuri if she could use the healing skill, and Yuri agreed that she could cast this cleansing spell. Argo asked her to apply it to the water pouch they had just filled so the water would be clean and not cause stomach pain when drinking, and Yuri inwardly admired this clever survival trick. Yuri focused magical power in her palm, preparing the healing spell, but while she was gathering energy, Karin suddenly ran up from behind, her eyes shining with excitement. She had found something. The unexpected collisions frightened Yuri. The magic beam went off course and flew in another direction instead of the water pouch, causing Argo to shout in alarm. The healing light shot into the sky and disappeared, leaving Argo surprised, while Karen did not even pay attention and instead rummaged through Yuri's cat bag. The researcher shouted with wild excitement. She found another small piece of slime on the bag and exclaimed that the smell was unmistakable, and Yuri could only stand speechless at Karin's excessive zeal. After a small shock, Argo hurriedly apologized to Yuri for Karin's sharpness. Yuri clicked her tongue and let go of the offense, and the group together returned to where Amanda was preparing the tea party. The fortress of Isil seemed peaceful. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the kettle boiled cheerfully. The four sat together on a mat in the middle of the clearing, savoring tea and Luca fruit juice. Karen took a sip and said enthusiastically how warm it was. Warm tea drove away the fatigue. Yuri took the cup from Argo's hands. Joy shone on her face and warmth spread through her body, and Amanda kindly suggested she rest a little and said that they would all return to the fortress together, because her 8-year-old body was probably tired from the long journey. During the rest, Yuri suddenly felt that something was wrong. She felt her belt. Argo asked what was the matter, and she screamed in panic that her shoulder bag had disappeared. She suddenly remembered that she might have taken it off and left it on a stone near the stream earlier. Yuri jumped up and rushed to the stream, not listening to Argo and Amanda calling her to stop. Yuri ran in panic along the path, scolding herself for carelessness and fearing that without the bag it would be difficult for her to perform operations with the virtual inventory. Although she could technically pull items out of the void, the sudden appearance of things without any container could easily reveal her secret. After a long search, Yuri finally found the cat-shaped bag sitting on a stone near the stream and sighed with relief, reaching out to pick it up when suddenly a small creature with yellowish-pale skin and a sinister face jumped sharply out of the bushes behind her. Yuri froze, meeting a goblin live for the first time in her life. The goblin bared sharp teeth and lunged straight at Yuri, growling threateningly, and the girl was so frightened that she barely uttered a quiet and froze in place. At that moment Argo appeared. His face turned pale when he saw the danger unfolding with the girl, and in desperate anxiety he shouted, "Yuri." The goblin wildly swung an attack, and Yuri had to keep retreating, dodging, and panicking. Argo recognized him as a forest goblin and reached for his sword, preparing to intervene. In that desperate moment on the edge of life and death, Yuri managed to pull herself together. She stretched out her hand forward and silently ordered herself to immediately use magic to protect herself. The wild goblin swung to deliver a deadly blow to Yuri, and she, overwhelmed with horror, squeezed her eyes shut. At that moment she thought she would not manage to avoid the attack in time. Somewhere further away, Argo desperately rushed into the attack, but the distance seemed too great to make it in time. Suddenly, a small shadow flew through the air and with incredible speed struck the goblin in the face, scared him, made him slip and roll back. The collision was so strong that the monster exclaimed in surprise and completely lost the ability to attack. Yuri barely opened her eyes and could not believe her eyes. A tiny black cat softly landed and slowly approached where she was sitting, and Yuri looked in confusion thinking, "What is this?" While the cat looked at her with its big sparkling eyes. The cat quietly meowed a soft, friendly meow tilde, as if wanting to calm the girl after the recent horror. Yuri froze and kept repeating, "Why is there a cat here?" And to his great surprise, the black cat was not scared. It bared its teeth at the goblin climbing up, and the goblin jumped back in fright. The tiny cat stood guard in front of Yuri, like a brave protector, leaving the girl with a huge question: who really is this strange savior? At the spot near the stream, Yuri was still sitting on the ground, and the black cat stood between her and the goblin. That very night, Argo rushed forward, and shouting Yuri's name, tried to hold her back. He instantly drew his sword and began casting a spell to fill the blade with the power of water, commanding hydric force to appear and smash the enemy. With a powerful slash accompanied by a high-pressure stream, Argo threw the goblin far away before it could react, then hurried back to check Yuri for injuries and apologized for being late. Yuri looked admiringly at the knight, but did not forget to point with his hand at the goblin limping into the forest. Having made sure the goblin had finally fled, Argo sighed with relief and sheathed his sword, then approached Yuri to check once more if she was okay. At that moment, the black cat gently meowed meow and rubbed its head against Yuri's leg, and the girl suddenly remembered her tiny savior. Yuri opened her eyes wide, looking at the cat clinging to her, puzzled, thinking, "He saved me, so why would he appear in such a dangerous magical forest?" The black cat raised its eyes to Yuri, looked at her with shining eyes, and gently licked her hand as if greeting her friendly. Unable to resist the stunning cuteness, Yuri hugged the black cat tightly and exclaimed with happiness at its softness and warmth, enjoying how it licked her cheek, silently marveling at how magical it was. But Amanda rushed from afar with a frightened expression and shouted at Yuri, "Step away from that creature immediately." Amanda rushed and stood between Yuri and the cat, sternly warning that this was not an ordinary cat, but an extraordinarily dangerous magical beast. Yuri stood unbelieving when Amanda declared that this was the cub of the infamous dark panther. Meanwhile, the kitten sat calmly, licking itself with an innocent look, which only confused Yuri more. Yuri insisted that the cat be protected. It had saved her life, so she wanted to take it with her, and our ghost stood nearby with crossed arms, looking thoughtfully. Although he knew that this species was a magical creature, he himself had seen how it helped Yuri. He thought that perhaps it had just been born and therefore had not yet shown aggression, or there was some special reason they did not know about, while Karin and Amanda stood behind, looking at the cat suspiciously. Karin suddenly made a suggestion and asked Yuri about the healing skill she had accidentally used earlier, suspecting that the magical light had inadvertently hit the cat and cleansed or tamed it. Yuri awkwardly scratched her head. She herself did not know if Alyosha Online had any magic that could so strangely tame monsters. Argo sighed helplessly from too many unsolved mysteries, and decided to return with Yuri and the black cat to the fortress to ask Captain Leon for advice. Hearing this, Yuri exclaimed joyfully and asked permission to take the cat, but Argo loudly and categorically refused, and the chapter ended with the company noisily returning to the island fortress with their new fluffy friend. The little black cat faithfully walked behind Yuri's group as if it were an inseparable part of her. Yuri looked at the cat with eyes shining with joy, then turned and sincerely bowed, thanking Knight Argo for having saved her life earlier. Argus smiled kindly, said it was his duty, and advised her not to run away like that again. Yuri asked with interest about Argo's technique. Amanda once covered their blades with the power of the elements, and enthusiastically explained that it was the skill of a magical swordsman, a fighting style that smoothly combines swordsmanship and magic. To demonstrate this, Amanda immediately drew her sword and spoke a spell, summoning fire. Bright flames burst around the blade, causing Yuri to exclaim with admiration. Amanda proudly said she skillfully controlled both fire and wind. Seeing her performance, Argo did not want to fall behind and focused on summoning water techniques around his blade. Yuri's eyes widened with admiration as she watched ribbons of water snake around the young knight's sword. Two knights stood shoulder to shoulder, displaying an impressive elemental power, causing Yuri to jump up and shout excitedly as if she had entered a real fantasy world. She kept praising how cool they were, while the researcher Karin behind could only sigh at the excessive noise. Argo modestly said that next to Captain Leon, their strength does not even come close. Amanda added that it was Captain Leon who made this fighting technique popular, so even women with less physical strength could fight effectively with magic. And she revealed that Leon is a genius who can use magic of all elements, which stunned Yuri. When Yuri asked if she could become a magical swordswoman, Amanda laughed and said that with Yuri's current monopoly, she was more suited to be a sage who creates spells rather than wield a sword. Karin burst into the conversation. She leaned towards Yuri and persistently asked if she knew any magic besides lightning, and Yuri hesitated a little and replied that she could use fire, water, wind, and earth. Answer that made three adults freeze for a few seconds. The girl has a rare ability to control several elements. Karin began to see Yuri as a truly promising subject for research. Although she insisted that she was only dealing with slimes, the group gloomily headed towards the island fortress. But when they ventured into the dark forest, Yura suddenly felt the oppressive atmosphere tightening the space around. Yuri's intuition did not fail. Karin and Argo also instantly changed their expressions and felt the air become different, and Amanda quickly grabbed Yuri and shouted to hold on tight because something very bad was approaching. Experienced knights with anxious faces made Yuri tremble, and the group rushed to run faster, racing against time, because the darkness in the forest seemed to tighten and envelop them. Argo decided this was the worst moment to meet. Yuri clung to Amanda's neck and asked what was happening, but heard only the tense, "We must flee immediately," and the little black cat was also running behind with all its might. Suddenly Argo stopped and blocked the way ahead with a grim expression. Dozens of burning red eyes emerged from the dark thickets, and fierce growls echoed all around. The group froze. They realized that these were not a few wandering goblins, but an entire regiment surrounding them. Argo shouted to Amanda to protect Yuri at all costs, while he himself would stay in the rear to meet the horde emerging from the darkness. In the midst of the circle of fierce goblins, Argo still gripped the sword wrapped in water magic, and resolutely said that as the deputy commander of the island fortress he would cover the rear. Yuri shouted his name in panic, and Amanda quickly grabbed the girl and rushed to flee. Amanda brushed off Yuri's hesitation and decisively said that if they did not return to the fortress and report quickly, the consequences would be serious, and Yuri, staying here, would only become a burden that would hinder Argo from fighting. Yuri still struggled and shouted that she could fight too, but Karin instantly silenced her with a scream and sternly asked if Yuri intended to use magic to sweep away Argo along with the horde of goblins. The slime researcher loudly said, "Power without control is simply a disaster," and if Yuri had unleashed it, Argo would now have turned to ashes before the monsters. Yuri was so stunned that she fell silent. She realized she could not refute this bitter truth. Amanda, Karin, and the little black cat rushed to the fortress at full speed, bouncing to manage to call for reinforcements. Amanda ran and urged Yuri. If they wanted Argo to survive, they needed to report to Captain Leon as soon as possible. Yuri lay on Amanda's shoulder, and fears that Argo might sacrifice himself spun in her head. A gentle smile of the night flashed through her thoughts, squeezing her chest with pain and regret. Yuri began to feel the cruel difference between the game and reality. If she died in this world, everything would truly end forever, and in her soul she screamed that she would not accept such a cruel truth. A fierce will to protect her comrades grew in Yuri, so she decided to act, not just run away. She gathered all her determination and entered the command status open into the system to find a new power that would turn the situation around and save her important friend. In mid-flight, Yuri opened the status panel in search of a solution, and instantly scanned her personal stats and the huge set of sage skills from spell levels to healing and alchemy. She whispered that she must immediately find some skill to help Argo, because she would never agree to watch him die. Rejecting destructive attacks like Thunderbolt and inappropriate single-target spells, Yuri focused on area skills and exclaimed with hope upon seeing that these were area spells, a privilege of the Sage class. Although Yuri was worried about the distance between them, she resolutely decided to try this magic to cover Argo from behind. Yuri closed her eyes and gathered all her mind, imagining the magic reaching Argo. She shouted the spell Mass Healing, and warm light exploded, enveloping Amanda and Karin nearby. Not stopping there, Yuri cast the spell's Area Protect Shield, an area magic shield in a chain to maximize the defense of her comrades. Amanda and Karin froze in amazement as magical circles and shield symbols swirled around their bodies. Amanda felt her physical strength and mana surge, and she gasped at the true power of the tiny girl in her arms. Yuri smiled with relief that protective icons were working, but suddenly a strange sound rang out and the group became alert, asking who was approaching. Captain Leon and the reinforcement knights suddenly appeared behind them, and Amanda joyfully called out his name. Seeing the magical lights around Amanda, Leon asked what had happened and what the strange glow was. But when he looked toward the forest, which radiated that oppressive atmosphere, it seemed he realized how serious the situation was. Amanda quickly reported that a magical uprising had begun. Hordes of goblins poured out from the depths of the forest. She said Argo was holding the line against the crowd alone, and the surrounding knights roared in horror. Leon called Argo's action reckless, but immediately ordered the rest of the formation to prepare to enter the forest as reinforcements, and entrusted Amanda with taking Yuri to a safe place. Amanda was already about to take Yuri away when the girl suddenly broke free, and resolutely declared that she could join the fight because she knew how to heal. Yuri fervently begged Leon to let her go help Argo, and this deeply moved Amanda. Leon looked sternly at the girl and remarked that she looked more like a mage than a. Here is a typical medic. Yuri did not hesitate and loudly declared that she was a true sage, albeit only first level. Her confidence and determination to protect her friends made Leon fall silent for a moment before he agreed. He ordered Amanda to go ahead, secretly hoping that with Yuri's healing help, Argo might still come out unscathed. The knights, led by Leon and guided by Amanda, rushed to the battlefield. As they approached, Amanda pointed forward and shouted, "Argo is there." And Yuri and the others held their breath, looking at the clearing where the young knight was in immediate danger. Leon's reinforcement squad has just arrived and immediately saw Argo desperately fighting among a swarm of goblins, exhausted and covered in blood. The young knight kept swinging his sword in defense, and Yuri, seeing him so worn out, shouted his name in horror. Captain Leon's face turned pale with rage. He immediately drew his sword and rushed into battle to cover his subordinate. A powerful strike pushed back the monsters besieging Argo, but Argo had already exhausted all his strength. He only managed to notice the captain before falling, and the sword slipped from his hand. Argo lay motionless in a pool of blood, and Yuri froze in shock. She could not believe her eyes, seeing that her friend who had just smiled at her now lay still. Fear and sorrow overwhelmed Yuri. She instantly stretched both hands forward and poured all the remaining mana to create a saving spell, shouted healing, aimed only at Argo, continuously uttering the words as warm restorative light fell on his body. Although she was terribly worried whether the magic would work in time, Yuri forced herself not to stop until he woke up after a tense moment. Argo's sword twitched on the ground and he began to groan softly. And seeing this, Yuri burst into tears of joy. He really came out of the critical state. The young knight slowly sat up and clenched his fists, feeling life returning to his body. Argo gently smiled at Yuri and sincerely thanked her for saving his life again. Seeing his familiar smile, Yuri uncontrollably wept with immense relief after she had barely crossed the line between life and death. Argo quickly grabbed his sword and stood up, insisting that it was not time to rest. The battle was still raging ahead. Next to them, Amanda also sighed with relief. The matter was resolved in time. While Leon and the knights finished clearing the remaining goblins, Yuri suddenly was struck by a strong dizziness. The girl felt her body and mind grow heavy. She had spent much more mana than an 8-year-old could afford. Yuri staggered and fell to the ground next to the little black cat, and Amanda screamed in panic. The last thing the girl saw Leon and Argo fighting bravely side by side, protecting the peace of the forest. Although her soul was mature, the child's body still could not withstand the sight of so much blood. Yuri suddenly came to after fainting, and the first thing she saw the large face of a stranger leaning over her to take a closer look. Yuri screamed in panic, not having time to come to her senses and see who it was, while the man indifferently remarked that she seemed to have regained consciousness and loudly asked if she was hungry. Amanda laughed at how Yuri exaggerated and explained that the burly man was Frank. Frank was a priest with healing magic who helped take care of her. He was a bit offended when called muscular, and Yuri was surprised he was not at all the frail cleric she had imagined. Frank kindly handed Yuri a bowl of hot soup and noted that her complexion had greatly improved. This warmed her heart. Yuri suddenly remembered what had happened before she fainted and hurriedly asked about Argo and the goblin horde. Amanda smiled and reassured her that thanks to Yuri's great help, the goblins were completely destroyed and Argo was now healthy and safe. Frank explained that Yuri fainted simply due to a lack of mana and advised her to eat and rest. She obediently agreed, then curiously asked about the magical uprising everyone was talking about. Amanda said that Captain Leon was waiting to discuss it with her, so Yuri excitedly jumped up and demanded to go see Argo immediately. Frank carried Yuri on his shoulders to Leon's office, and the girl brightened with joy when she saw Argo standing there reporting readiness. Argo turned and greeted Yuri with a radiant smile, which made her sigh with relief seeing that he had fully recovered. She jumped down and rushed to him, while Frank stood nearby watching their warm reunion. Argo anxiously inquired about Yuri's condition upon hearing that her mana had been drained, but the girl waved it off and said she was perfectly fine thanks to Frank's care. Argo stepped closer and sincerely placed his hand on her head, thanking her because without her magic he might not have survived. And receiving a gentle stroke from the knight, Yuri blushed shyly and felt incredible warmth inside. Leon apologized for calling Yuri when she was still tired, but said he wanted to personally thank her for defending the fortress during that skirmish. Yuri awkwardly replied that it was Leon who brought reinforcements in time, so she should be the one thanking him. Leon thoughtfully said that he went into the forest because he felt a huge anomaly that shook the entire fortress. Leon revealed that anomaly was a terribly huge lightning strike that hit the forest, so powerful that people took it for a natural disaster. Yuri turned pale and broke out in a cold sweat when she realized that Leon was talking about her super-powerful thunder arrow, and in her soul she roared because her secret was exposed. Under Captain's interrogation, the girl only lowered her head and with belated repentance, confessed her mistake. When Leon saw Yuri tense up opposite him, he did something so unexpected that stunned everyone. He quietly approached, picked her up, and comfortably sat her on his knees in the captain's mighty chair. Leon's sudden, almost child-obsessed act made Yuri utter a stunned ah, and Amanda and Argo behind could only smile crookedly, looking at the boss' strange hobby. Yuri shuddered in shock and screamed in fright when Captain Leon suddenly lifted her onto his lap in the middle of the office, and Leon calmly explained that when their eyes are at the same level, it would be easier to talk. And Argo and Amanda, standing nearby, just looked at each other in deep embarrassment. Yuri blushed to her ears and was about to object, but seeing the captain's serious face, she gave in and allowed herself to be treated like a tiny child. Leon immediately got to the point. The sudden appearance of such a number of goblins is an unmistakable sign of an approaching magical uprising. Yuri shuddered at the unfamiliar word and instantly interrupted to ask what it really means. Amanda pulled out a map, and explained with anxiety that it is a catastrophe that happens about once every 10 years. The number of magical beasts in the forest suddenly increases and they pour out to attack the surrounding areas. And Argo added that usually only weak creatures like slimes mill at the forest edge. But during such a magical uprising, even fierce gray wolves and hunting leopards appear in crowds. Amanda warned that the worst is the appearance of the king of beasts about a month after the omen begins. An extremely powerful mutated creature, capable of commanding an army of magical beasts and ravaging the human world. Leon grimly added that under the king of beasts' leadership, the horde will sweep through and devour everything from forests to villages and human lives. Yuri shuddered in horror imagining such destruction, but Leon assured that Fortress Island exists precisely to prevent this disaster, and that they have already sent warnings to neighboring countries, and their ultimate goal is to destroy the king of beasts and put an end to the chaos. Leon turned to Yuri and said firmly that although she is still a child, she has magical power that we do not have. He admitted that a child should not be forced to fight, but for the sake of peace in the country, he nevertheless decided to ask her to lend them her power. Yuri froze for a few seconds, her thoughts swirling. Could someone so new, only first level, really do something great? She remembered Argo and the knights who selflessly fought to protect her in the forest and thought, if she does nothing and lets these good friends sacrifice themselves, she will regret it all her life. Although the fear of magical beasts still remained, the desire to help others overcame everything, and her small hands involuntarily clenched the hem of her dress with a determination she had never known before. Yuri raised her gaze to Leon with resolute eyes and loudly replied that she understood and would do everything possible to fight alongside everyone to protect the fortress. And Leon smiled gently and thanked the young wise woman, which significantly eased the atmosphere in the room. Amanda and Argo stood behind, stunned. For the first time, the stern Captain Leon looked at Yuri so tenderly, as if he was about to melt. Amanda teased, as if Yuri was so sweet that even Captain Leon could not maintain his usual coldness, and the girl shyly scratched the back of her head. Then Leon inquired about her knowledge of magic and was amazed to learn that the broad spells she used had never existed in this world before. When asked how long she had been practicing magic, Yuri awkwardly said about 3 years to somewhat match the time she had spent in the game Illusia Online. Yuri's answer surprised Leon even more. If she had been training since she was 5, she must come from an incredibly powerful magical country, and Frank also asked with interest where the Kingdom of Japan was located. But Yuri only shook her head and said she did not know because her memories of that land seemed wrapped in the fog of a magical forest. While the group continued the discussion, a small black cat suddenly jumped up from the floor and scared everyone. The black kitten darted straight onto Yuri's lap coquettishly and purred, almost knocking her backward in surprise. Yuri screamed in fright, asking what was happening while the kitten clung to her, licked her hand, and rubbed its head as if demanding affection. This chaotic but joyful scene closed the tense conversation about the looming disaster due to the magical uprising outside. Yuri tightly hugged the black kitten and joyfully exclaimed finally, she had a little friend in this world. Argo smiled and said he had brought it because the cat constantly followed him. But Captain Leon's face became serious, and he warned that although it looked harmless, it was actually a descendant of the infamous nightshade leopard. He emphasized that they still could not say for sure whether this creature was truly safe, or if it would become a great threat as it grew. Leon looked coldly at the kitten and decided that this was a great opportunity to study the characteristics of this magical beast. He seriously warned Yuri that if it posed a danger to people, he would have to deal with it immediately, then asked her if she really wanted to raise it. The girl did not hesitate and loudly declared that she would do everything possible to care for the kitten and teach it. And seeing Yuri's determination, Lan agreed and promised to issue an order that no one in the fortress would harm it. Yuri bowed her head and sincerely thanked them for allowing her to take the kitten. Amanda and Frank were also happy for little Sage's joy, and Yuri quietly confessed that she had long dreamed of having a cat but had never had the opportunity. Amanda smiled and said that since she decided to leave him, the most important thing now is to give him a good name. Yuri picked up the kitten, looked closely and went through names. Kira seemed too ordinary, so after some thought she chose the name Noir, because the kitten's fur was black as night. Everyone enthusiastically said that the name was very beautiful and fitting. Yuri hugged Noir tightly and beamed with a smile, solemnly accepting the new member into her mission to destroy magical creatures. Yuri stood silently, looking towards the forest and trembling as she thought about the magical uprising that happens once every 10 years, approaching like a disaster, and wondered if her appearance in this world at this time was fate. Noir, as if sensing her mistress's mood, jumped out of her hands and made Yuri shudder. Amanda teasingly asked where Yuri planned to put Noir to sleep, and the girl instantly ran after the mischievous kitten. Yuri noticed a large map on the wall and asked with interest if it was a map of this land. Argo enthusiastically explained that it was a map of the entire continent and showed her where the Kingdom of Ares was located, on the land where they stood. Yuri tried to find the name Japan on the map, but found no trace and was a little disappointed. She told herself that she must help others and at the same time look for a way back to her old world, so she blurted out a question about the location of the Tower of the Sage. Argo asked in surprise if it was the Tower of the Sage that Yuri passed on the way here, and the girl confirmed the tower was supposed to stand in the very heart of the enchanted forest, as she remembered. But suddenly Captain Leon objected very seriously it was impossible. In the very center there was only the majestic sacred mountain Meteora, there was no tower at all, and Yuri only exclaimed, "Ah." Aloud freezing, and when Leon insisted that there was no tower, she whispered in shock that if the tower did not exist, she would never find her way home. Then Leon quietly approached and put his hand on her head to calm her, gently promising that the fortress would help find the way back and not to despair. The warmth of his hand brought tears to Yuri's eyes, but also restored her peace. Amanda rushed to Yuri and hugged her tightly, declaring that the girl could stay in the fortress as long as she wished. Her presence was like a healing balm for everyone, and Yuri was squeezed in Amanda's warm embrace so tightly that she barely had enough air. Frank and Argo smiled and agreed that they would gladly learn more from Yuri about the strange magic she possessed, and Little Noir curled up at their feet, as if assuring that she would always have the most devoted companions. Seeing everyone's shining faces, Yuri smiled happily and silently thanked fate for meeting such kind people. She promised to become stronger and level up to find the answers about the missing tower herself. Yuri's eyes shone with determination. As she looked at the map of the continent, she knew that this journey was only beginning, and she would not give up. The next day, Yuri was already standing on the training ground with a serious expression, ready to give Frank a magic lesson, as he had asked earlier. Frank and Argo were thrilled to see a first-level sage girl with such a huge reserve of skills. Yuri smiled confidently and announced that the lesson was starting right now, charging the air. Then she handed Frank a sheet with a list of spells she could use, and Gudgenut and Argo froze in amazement at their variety, while Frank was most tormented by curiosity about how Yuri could heal from a distance without touching the target. For Yuri, this seemed quite normal in the game, but for Frank a technique that broke all the usual magical rules of this world. Yuri, folding her hands like a true expert, explained that the secret was to imagine the flow of magic flying straight to the target, instead of concentrating all the power only in the palm. Frank was confused because he was used to reading long, complex spells. Yuri advised him to try to compress mana and release it from the fingertip with the power of imagination, and Frank concentrated hard and shouted, "Heal," trying to send light to Argo, who was standing at a distance. But Frank's magical beam only traveled a few steps and faded. He fell down, broken by disappointment. Yuri rushed to encourage him, "Don't give up. This is a completely new technique," and Argo stood nearby with the list of spells and asked about the skill Healing Wind, which heals the whole group. Yuri explained that this is a technique for the whole team, and again left the two men puzzled by the strange gaming terminology. Yuri suddenly realized that in this world people do not know how to form a party through a system window like in the game, and thought, if in the game you can make friends just by touching a name, here you will have to do it with words or actions. Yuri decided to test this and boldly asked Frank to form a combat group with her. Frank, embarrassed by what she was doing, still carefully watched her actions. Yuri asked Frank to take her hand and say that he agreed to join the team. The God Knight awkwardly obeyed. As soon as Frank spoke these words, a system beep sounded and a bright message flashed before Yuri's eyes. "Frank has joined the team." She jumped for joy at the success of the experiment, while Frank stood rooted to the spot, seeing no changes except a small information panel hanging nearby. Yuri understood that only she could see these system windows, and Frank had no idea about their existence, so she decided to take advantage of this and asked Frank to try remote healing once more to check if it would work. Frank gathered his courage and shouted several times towards Argo, "Heal, heal," until his mana was exhausted and he had to constantly drink potions to restore mana. Yuri watched the sweat-covered paladin training with anxious exclamations, fearing he might overdo it with restorative medicines. Argo looked at Frank in surprise. The paladin's appearance had not changed even after he joined the team. So Yuri explained that this was system magic that only she could notice. Yuri thought that if this was really a game world, there should be a quest window here that would hint how to teach Frank the spell Heals, and quietly hoped she could open a shared panel for the whole group so everyone would have easy access to the information. She concentrated intensely and tried to connect to the Elusia online system to open the window, but burning red error messages flashed one after another in the air, and Ellie's familiar voice reported a connection failure and that the attempt limit was exhausted. This threw the girl into a panic, and Argo, standing nearby, began to ask worriedly when he saw Yuri muttering. She was talking to herself about absurdities that did not exist in reality. Despite continuous error warnings, suddenly a beam of light exploded, a successful connection chime sounded, and the quest window appeared. Frank jumped when the group status panel suddenly appeared right in front of his face, and he screamed in horror because he did not understand what was happening. And Yuri was equally stunned. She did not even expect that she could intervene in the system and make others see what was meant only for players. Frank trembled, reached out to the virtual panel, and asked Yuri if this object was safe. She smiled reassuringly and said everything was fine. Argo, standing nearby, looked puzzled. He still saw nothing. And then Yuri realized that the window was visible only to those who created the party. She immediately asked to take Argus' hand to invite him to join, and soon a message appeared confirming the young knight's presence in the combat group. When all three saw the status panel, Yuri excitedly suggested Frank try casting heal again using party support. Frank regained confidence, focused, and shouted Argo heal, releasing a beam of light towards his friend. A powerful magical stream flew exactly along the trajectory, and along with it appeared a message that the target was healing. Argo froze in surprise. When the spell worked perfectly, Yuri jumped for joy and congratulated Frank. He really created a miracle. Frank was delighted. He finally mastered remote healing and kept thanking the little sage for helping him unlock a new power. Argo watched as the two of them joked and only gave a crooked smile, mentally deciding that they should not get so carried away with games involving magic. When the training ended, Frank quietly admired the strangeness of the country called Japan, where magic seemed to have its own personality and could talk to people. Yuri only smiled at the cute misunderstanding of the God Knights and thought that explaining what a game was now would be too complicated. The group decided to continue the experiments, and Frank still could not take his eyes off the floating virtual panel in front of him. Night fell and Yuri collapsed on the bed, completely exhausted after a long day of training and setting up the system for everyone. She muttered, blaming herself for being too impatient, and because of that the tiny 8-year-old girl could not endure, while Frank seemed full of strength. Yuri silently doubted whether her action would really help everyone in the upcoming battle. And suddenly Frank complained that the system panels kept appearing and blocking his view, which made him very irritated and uncomfortable. Yuri quickly got up and explained that if the group disbanded, those windows would immediately disappear. After she gave the order to disperse, Frank sighed with relief. His vision returned to normal, and the group quietly admired how easily she controlled magic. Lying in a quiet room with the cat Noir nearby, Yuri felt a quiet joy. Frank and Argo were satisfied with the new progress in magical research, but doubts began to gnaw at her. Besides healing and protection, she needed to learn to accurately apply offensive spells so as not to repeat the disaster like last time. Yuri decided to ask Amundha for advice. The next day she was now the most reliable person, like an older sister to her. The next morning in Captain Lone's office, Yuri stood waiting, with a passionate anticipation and a bit of nervousness on her face. Amanda smiled and said that Leon had found someone who was perfect to teach her control of offensive magic. Yuri curiously asked if this person would come, and Leon nodded, confirming that he had summoned her, so she would be introduced immediately. There was a knock on the door, and a young woman with a very polite manner entered the room. She introduced herself as Selena and said she had come at Captain Leon's summons. Yuri looked at Selena with wide admiring eyes. Her luxurious appearance and confident posture enchanted with every step. Selena bowed aristocratically and proudly stated her full name, Selena Lively. Yuri exclaimed with admiration as if she had seen a fairy tale princess. But Leon noted that this was not a royal court and such formal bows were unnecessary, ordered her to raise her head, then introduced Yuri to Selena and asked her to help the young seer learn to control her enormous magical power. Selena looked closely at Yuri and repeated the girl's name with distrust, recalling that foreign identity Godlike that had recently caused a stir. Leon added that Yuri was a sage by profession. She could cast devastating spells and perform healing charms, but on the battlefield it was difficult for her to control her power. Selena smiled and accepted Leon's request, stating that if it was the captain's order she would devote herself fully to it. She turned to Yuri with a stern look, repeated her full name once more and emphasized that although Yuri was a child, there would be no leniency in training. Although Selena's presence slightly frightened Yuri, she boldly bowed her head in a bow and promised to do everything possible to learn. Amanda, not hiding her admiration, said that although Selena was only 16, she was already considered a true magical genius of the region. And the group set off together to a special training ground with walls that absorbed magic to ensure safety. Selena asked Yuri to show her magical attributes that could be used to form a general idea of the new student's abilities. Yuri naively listed the elements from lightning and wind to fire, water, and earth, and Selena froze in amazement because the girl had a rare potential to master all the elements. After a moment of shock, Selena quickly pulled herself together and asked Yuri to try to release a wind arrow at a wooden scarecrow standing in the center of the courtyard, so she could assess her level of control. Yuri took a deep breath and focused all her mind, preparing for the technique as the new teacher had asked. She promised herself to restrain her power as much as possible to avoid another terrible explosion. Yuri raised her hand to the mannequin and decisively shouted the name of the skill wind arrow. From Yuri's palm suddenly burst a fierce whirlwind of wind and rushed at the target at incredible speed. Although she tried to restrain it, the wind pressure still made the surrounding air fiercely tremble, and the wooden mannequin took the hit, instantly torn apart by wind blades and creating an impressive spectacle under Selena's stern gaze. After the powerful attack shattered the mannequin into splinters, Yuri briefly showed disappointment. She again failed to restrain her power. And beside her, Selena was also stunned by the destructive force of what was supposed to be an ordinary spell. Yuri thought to herself that she needed to narrow the radius of the spell's effect so as not to accidentally injure anyone. And when Selena saw that she was about to practice again, she immediately shouted for her to stop and first work on controlling her power, not mindlessly casting spells. Yuri understood that if she could not control her power, she would endanger those nearby in the next battle. So she decided to try a new method each time she used her power. She imagined fewer wind arrows. Yuri raised her hand, deeply focused on the new wooden mannequin, and shouted, "Wind arrow," jumping to deliver a softer strike. A much smaller gust of wind shot out and hit the target, and Yuri shouted with excitement she had finally done it. She felt again the same sensation she had when Frank cast remote healing, and directed that feeling into an attack instead of shattering the entire dummy as in previous failed attempts. Only its head cracked. Yuri jumped for joy and ran to show Selena that she had managed to adjust her magical power, but Selena's face darkened with shock. How could a child draw such a huge amount of mana with a single simple spell? The young instructor could hardly believe his eyes. The wooden mannequin, protected by extremely powerful defensive magic, was so easily torn apart by Yuri. To continue training, Amanda pulled out a large pile of round logs and suggested Yuri practice the technique of fine magical cutting. Amanda laughed and remarked that this way Yuri would improve her dexterity and the fortress would have firewood for winter, to which Yuri could only exclaim in surprise, "Ha!" Not believing that her exercises had turned into such boring work, and she had to tirelessly make small air cuts, splitting the logs into neat pieces until she was exhausted and fell to the ground. Amanda was very pleased with the result and enthusiastically praised the girl for her efforts, while Selena kept a stern expression but ordered to end the session. Amanda joked that the next step might be lighting and extinguishing fire with magic to diversify the training. When the session ended, Yuri politely ran up and sincerely thanked Selena for teaching her. But Selena remained cold and insisted that she was only following Captain Leon's orders, so Yuri did not need to thank her. But Yuri's face showed admiration for Selena's obvious respect for Leon, and this made the gifted mage blush a little and look away. Then Selena began telling Yuri about the demonic uprising, that catastrophe 8 years ago, so the girl could feel the seriousness of the upcoming war. She admitted that the leader of that sinister army was the Lich King, an immortal monarch who could resurrect endlessly and possess terrible dark power. Yuri listened with anxiety on her face, recalling that the final boss in Illusia Online had very similar traits. When the armies of 6 nations stood powerless before the Lich King, a 16-year-old youth bravely rushed forward, and with a rune-engraved sword killed that immortal king. Selena loudly exclaimed that this heroic youth was their beloved Captain Leongard. Yuri was surprised to learn that Leon was only 24, and silently admired the great power of the captain to whom she had long been attached, begging to sit on his lap. Selena sternly asked if Yuri was truly mentally prepared to face such a catastrophe upon learning the truth about the past. She looked straight into the young sage's eyes and said she did not care where Yuri was from. But if Yuri dares to do something that harms or insults Leongard's honor, Selena swore never to forgive her for it, even if she is just a sweet little child. When Selena left the training room with her stern warnings, Yuri could only stare blankly and weakly respond, "Yes." Amanda gently approached, softly stroked Yuri's head to calm her down, and said not to worry, Selena can be harsh sometimes. She explained that Selena is fanatically devoted to Captain Leonhardt, which is why she is so sensitive. Yuri, hearing the word fan, became curious about what that feeling really is. Amanda thoughtfully recalled that during the previous demonic uprising, the city where Selena lived was brutally attacked by the undead army, and that war dragged on painfully and tragically, leaving many places devastated. When Yuri asked with curiosity how long it lasted, Amanda replied that it took a whole year to quell the chaos, and added that Selena was a noble heiress who lived in luxury. But Amanda voluntarily joined the knights to help the captain. Yuri listened silently and gradually understood why Selena considered Captain Leon a savior and a true hero. For the first time since she came to this world, Yuri felt the anger and cruelty of war through Amanda's story. Amanda said she was lucky to be among good people but secretly worried about the sudden arrival. Yuri clenched her fists and vowed not to let anyone suffer from prolonged battles anymore. She quietly hoped that people with painful pasts like Selena's would become fewer and the world would become more peaceful. Suddenly, Amanda switched to a playful tone and confessed that before coming to Issel Fortress, she really wanted to meet the legendary hero. Yuri blushed with excitement and asked if Amanda secretly liked the captain. But Amanda waved it off, saying the captain never bragged about his muscles, so she admired Jorg instead. The practical answer left Yuri speechless. Her sister was truly unpredictable. The cavalry of the island fortress rushed into the very heart of the dark magical forest there. Where trouble is just beginning, demons will swarm fiercely. Yuri sat on the shoulder of the holy warrior Frank with a radiant face, happy to finally leave the fortress and breathe fresh air. Frank walked on and reminded her to duck under low branches to avoid hitting them, while she thought to herself that children walk too slowly for such a long journey. Yuri couldn't hold back and asked about the true purpose of the expedition, and Frank explained that they needed to study the behavior of demons before the Demon King officially appeared. He said that identifying the types of monsters, which were increasing, would help the fortress devise the most precise countermeasures. Yuri joyfully and proudly informed Frank that now, thanks to Selena's teachings, she can accurately shoot the wind arrow at small targets. Frank laughed loudly and asked Yuri if she was ready to apply those techniques in real combat. Yuri blushed and worried, replied that maybe yes. Frank chuckled and told her to focus on healing for now. The girl looked back and realized, both Selena and Captain Leon are accompanying this expedition to ensure everyone's complete safety. Frank gently touched Yura's leg to calm her and said that the monsters in this area are no match for the knights of the fortress. He began to talk about Selena, nodding. She is a rare high-level sorceress who skillfully masters magic of all schools except Earth. Yuri only smiled quietly after these words. As a boundary mage, she truly possessed a multi-layered power that far surpassed even the gifted Selena. After a long march, the group stopped in a clearing in the forest to prepare to set up camp for the night. Frank put down Yuri and announced that this was their temporary camp. Yuri looked around in surprise. There were many more trees here than in the places she had been before. While everyone was bustling, setting up tents, Yuri noticed Selena standing alone, deeply focused. She closed her eyes, enchanted, begging the power of the great wind to gather into sharp arrows to destroy the enemies. A sudden burst of extremely powerful gusts of wind instantly toppled large trees ahead. Selena calmly withdrew her magic and turned to the knights to ask if such clearing was enough, leaving everyone around in awe. Captivated by the convenience of high-level magic, Yuri looked from afar with shining eyes, admiring the incredibly cool appearance of his teacher. Selena seemed to sense this gaze and threw back her usual proud expression. Seeing Selena blush and turn away after the matter, Yuri decided not to disturb her private moment. At that very moment, Amanda cheerfully ran up and loudly called his name, asking for help. Amanda enthusiastically suggested Yuri use technique wind chopping, which she had learned to split a pile of logs that Selena had just felled into neat firewood. Yuri snapped her fingers instantly and released a series of compact wind arrows to split the log. Amanda cheered her on enthusiastically, and Frank watched. Meanwhile, Captain Leon stood in the center of the camp with a stern face and gave the final orders. He ordered all squads to immediately search for mutants, and firmly warned that any mutant must immediately call for reinforcements to avoid unnecessary casualties. Horse-mounted squads scattered to hunt monsters, and Argo was assigned to stay and cover the rear together with Yuri. The girls smiled in agreement and decided that it was better to do something useful than just stand aside, so Argo herself used Cure to purify the team's water supplies, and Yuri thought that with her large MP reserve, such tasks were quite within her power. While Yuri was fussing with the water barrel, suddenly a threatening roar came from the thicket. Two wolf-like monsters with massive bodies and fierce eyes jumped forward, and Argo loudly shouted a warning that these were dangerous battle wolves. Yuri froze for a moment at the sudden appearance of the beasts, but Argo quickly drew his sword and ordered her to step back so he could handle them. Argo focused and whispered a spell, weaving water magic into his blade to deliver a finishing blow. A powerful slash with an explosion of a pressurized water jet threw the first battle wolf into the air and caused Yuri's admiration. But he did not forget to warn the girl. Be very careful, these monsters often travel in packs and can attack from several sides. After they drove off the first two wolves, Argo turned and asked if Yuri was injured, warning her never to lose vigilance in the forest. Yuri nodded many times, but her face instantly turned pale. Another battle wolf was rushing at Argo from behind at incredible speed, and she only managed to let out a frightened ah. While Argo was still stunned and did not have time to turn around, seeing her friend in mortal danger, Yuri instantly raised her finger and released a practiced wind arrow. A blade-sharp arrow sliced through the air and hit the wolf's body, knocking it aside almost at the last moment, and Yuri exhaled with relief. Her strike was precise and timely, saving her comrade's life. Just as the wolves were being pushed back, a small horned creature jumped out of the bushes resembling a rabbit but with an unexpectedly aggressive look. Argo caught his breath at the sight. Such monsters rarely attack humans first. He swung his sword lightning fast to stop the creature, while Yuri behind was still stunned by the chaos of the magical forest. Argo easily felled the horned rabbit with one slash and, turning around, warmly praised Yuri for how well she now controlled offensive magic. Yuri smiled shyly, but inwardly scolded herself for being distracted for a moment and almost allowing the monster to injure Argo. Argo gently stroked her head to calm her and said that it was precisely thanks to their coordinated work that the camp remained safe. Having made sure there were no more threats nearby, Argo picked up the corpse of the horned rabbit and a practical idea occurred to him. He enthusiastically suggested to Yuri to use the cure spell so that the meat would be completely clean before throwing it into the evening soup. Yuri could only exclaim, "Ah!" Amazed, she had never thought that her noble priestess magic would be needed for cooking in this way. By dinner, a steaming pot of soup with a rich aroma was boiling in the camp. Amanda and the knights cheerfully jumped up upon learning that it contained wild hare game hunted by Yuri and Argo. And while everyone ate heartily, Yuri, with a very mixed expression, thought that eating the very creature she had fought was quite. It was such an experience that words could not convey. Yuri timidly brought a spoonful of soup to her mouth, and suddenly her eyes lit up from the tasty, slightly sweet flavor of wild rabbit meat. She chewed and praised the dish so much that Amanda laughed and explained that if prepared correctly, monster meat can become an invaluable source of nutrition. Yuri cast aside her initial anxiety and, sitting by the flickering campfire, began to eat with appetite, ending a hectic day of research with warm food among comrades. Amanda smiled and explained to Yuri that eating monster meat is quite common even in the fortress, because it stands near the forest and they often use local food rather than waste supplies. Yuri still looked surprised, as she had heard about this for the first time, and Knight Frank, holding a bowl of soup, assured her that the meat is really tasty and is even often sold in towns, so there is no need to worry. Yuri whispered to herself that maybe it was just her own psychological barrier, and decided to enjoy the soup. It really was very tasty. In the corner of the yard, Cat Noir was also greedily devouring crumbs, and Amanda added that the meat of the horned rabbit, also called bofang, is famous for its rich flavor, which calmed Yuri even more. That evening by the fire, Amanda enthusiastically told how Yuri skillfully used the wind arrow, and added that Argo quickly finished off the horned rabbit with a precise sword strike. Captain Leon listened attentively and nodded approvingly. What impressive feats from such a small girl. And Yuri curiously asked Leon if monsters could attack them while they slept in the forest, because she was a little scared. Leon calmly assured Yuri she had nothing to fear. A strong magical barrier was raised around the camp that repels monsters, so as long as they stay within the expedition camp, everyone can rest peacefully and not worry about goblins or other creatures. Yuri silently admired how convenient it was to have protective magic, but reminded everyone that earlier the barrier had not activated in time, and because of that a monster managed to approach. Suddenly Cat Noir came over and meowed pleadingly, so Yuri asked if he still wanted to eat, kindly broke off a piece of meat from her bowl, fed Noir, and smiled watching him greedily devour it. At that moment, researcher Karin appeared and leaned in to look with a thoughtful expression. She noticed that Noir really preferred meat over milk, like a true monster, and Yuri stared in shock at the sudden appearance of the eccentric scientist. He screamed inside because Karin always appeared in a way that made people's hearts skip a beat. The scene shifted to another expedition. The knights suddenly sensed the presence of monsters and shouted that a goblin target had appeared, and immediately a brief skirmish broke out. The knights threw a magical net to catch the goblin who was trying to escape. The small monster was caught and it desperately struggled in the strong net. Two knights with serious faces held the ropes, feeling the fierce resistance of the creature, and the goblin, pressed to the ground, emitted strange moans, which made the expedition atmosphere even tenser. The knight reported to Captain Leon that they had successfully captured the goblin according to plan, and Leon turned and asked Yuri to try applying healing to the creature to test one hypothesis. Yuri obeyed and stretched both hands forward, gathering mana into a sparkling orb. The healing light enveloped the goblin. At first it was confused and froze for a moment. Leon ordered the knights to release the creature to see its further reaction, and when it was cleansed, the goblin slipped out of the net and looked at Yuri with milky white eyes, which made her feel uneasy and anxious. Suddenly the goblins let out a wild roar and rushed straight at Yuri, causing her to scream. A scream of horror, and Captain Leon instantly swung his sword, destroying the creature on the spot to protect Yuri. He calmly asked if she noticed any changes in the goblin after the spell, but she only replied in a trembling voice that she did not. Leon thought that perhaps healing only calms beast-like creatures like Noir and does not affect demonic races like goblins. Yuri fell to the ground, turned pale from shock, and quietly exclaimed that this experiment was too dangerous for her little heart. She sat on the grass and, playing with a dry blade of grass with Noir, sadly muttered, wondering why everything had become so complicated. Time rewound a few hours back. Before the expedition, Captain Leon and Knight Argo stood side by side and seriously discussed matters. Leon inquired about the current situation, and Argo replied that he wanted to report in more detail about the Dark Panther. Leon stared into his eyes and asked him to retell once more under what circumstances Yuri's potion made the cat so attached to her. Argo agreed and began preparing to recreate that event, while Leon carefully caught every hint. Yuri awkwardly explained to the captain that she hadn't looked closely and accidentally cast Cure to the side. Recalled that after the spell hit Noir, he instantly shielded her from the attack of a fierce goblin woman. And Argo nodded and said that under such circumstances it was quite likely her cure turned Noir into an ally. Leon pondered, then firmly said that if this were true, the ability to independently and willingly tame monsters would become an incredibly valuable discovery. And Yuri lit up with joy, imagining that then fighting the demon uprising disaster would become much easier. But Argo gently smiled and pointed to the essence of the problem: people who can heal are extremely few. And this surprised Yuri so much that she asked again if it was really so. Argo crossed his arms and realized that in the entire expedition camp, it seemed only Frank, Karin, and Yuri knew how to use healing spells. When Yuri heard the name Karin, she looked around confusedly and realized that the eccentric scientist had disappeared somewhere earlier. Argo sighed and thought that Karin had probably run off into the forest again chasing some slime, and this gave him a headache. Leon silently observed for a few seconds, then ordered the expedition to split up to act more effectively. He decided to go in one direction together with Yuri. While Frank and the rest broke into small groups for reconnaissance, Argo was entrusted to command those who remained and hold the position awaiting orders. And Yuri, although surprised to accompany the captain, shuddered, feeling behind her a sharp, envious gaze from Selena. Yuri lagged behind Leon and pitied herself. Although she only needed to use cure, she was still terribly afraid of hidden dangers, but encouraged herself to be strong for the sake of a piece of the Izzle fortress. Leon turned around and asked her to walk a little more. Yuri tried to look brave and replied that everything was fine, then asked Leon again she only needed to use cure on monsters, right? Leon nodded in confirmation and promised that under no circumstances would he allow any monster to harm her. Yuri sighed with relief and relied on the brave captain. At that moment, strange chit-chit sounds came from ahead. A pack of creatures resembling giant rats suddenly ran out of the bushes and attacked, forcing them both to instantly become alert. Leon instantly recognized them and exclaimed that these were battle rats, and when the pack rushed forward incredibly fast, Yuri was stunned by their agility. While the other knights still looked confused, the cat Noir suddenly rushed forward, bared his fangs, and let out a powerful shaya. Awakening the instincts of a true hunting panther, Yuri froze and called him by name, because she saw how her little cat became extraordinarily brave, and Noir, rushing straight into the pack of battle rats with great force, made the surrounding knights freeze in amazement, performed an impressive leap, grabbed a rat, and with a joyful sparkle in his eyes ran to Yuri as if seeking praise from his mistress, and Yuri exhaled with relief and cheerfully greeted him. Seeing how Noir easily won, Yuri joyfully clapped her hands and praised Noir for protecting everyone, while Leon crossed his arms and thoughtfully frowned, wondering whether it was the awakened instinct of a shadow panther monster or simply a cat's instinct to hunt rodents. Yuri smiled and said she considered it a wonderful cat instinct, which immediately lightened the mood. When another group of knights returned to the expedition camp, Leon and his comrades rushed to meet them and asked if they had already returned. Yuri warmly greeted Frank and his comrades and praised them for their efforts. One of the knights reported to Leon that the investigation had not progressed much and asked if the captain had met with Argo. And Frank excitedly announced that he had partially understood the way to turn monsters into allies. Yuri's eyes widened with surprise, and she exclaimed if he really did it. Frank smiled broadly and confirmed his success, which made Yuri happy, but suddenly he remembered and said that Yuri might not be able to see the result from where she was standing. Frank bent down to Yuri's eye level and told her to look closely. Yuri whispered confusedly what? She had not yet managed to understand when suddenly a small pink creature with one horn on its head and long ears jumped out from Frank's top, making such a cute squeak that Yuri froze in surprise. It was a mutated horned rabbit with incredibly bright coloring. And when the towering marshal with a tiny rabbit on his head stood before them, Leon and the surrounding knights burst out laughing. Everyone was chuckling at this funny and inappropriate sight. Argo laughed so hard his stomach hurt, teasing Frank as if he was laughing too much. And Frank shouted angrily for Argo to shut up and stop mocking. He explained that he was trying to cast a healing spell on a herd of horned bunnies they had caught, and among them was an extremely rare pink mutated bunny. Frank said that as soon as the healing effect took hold on the pink rabbit, it became incredibly clingy and started making plaintive sounds. As soon as Frank opened the net, it immediately jumped and settled right on his head to cuddle, and even he himself was embarrassed, while the group listened to the story with admiration and a smile at the marshal's strange luck. Yuri nodded approvingly and decided that if Noir was a cub of the Shadow Panthers, then using the healing spell on young monsters could really make them allies. Leon agreed that the probability was high and added that this was extremely important information for the fortress. Yuri exclaimed excitedly, "Ooh." But Leon seriously reminded that young monsters rarely appear deep in the forest because they usually come only during chaotic events like this demon uprising. And Yuri was a little upset at the thought that it would be hard to find more new allies. Then Leon slapped Pat on the head to calm her down, saying that if they could tame strong monsters from a young age, they would provide guards who in the future will defend the villages with powerful, honed combat strength. Itargo pondered. If word got out that powerful monsters could be tamed, high-ranking officials or elders from the temple would make a fuss to claim the benefit. Leon nodded and warned that if they were not careful, they might make Yuri catch young monsters for them, and he categorically did not want that because it would be too troublesome. He decided to keep it a secret and tell only after the demon uprising ended so that no unnecessary people would interfere during the crisis. Argo and others agreed to keep silent to protect Yuri. Suddenly Leon turned to Frank and asked if he had already named the pink horned rabbit, and the marshal began sweating nervously. Frank indifferently said they could just call it Uzagi, simply rabbit, and Argo burst out laughing at the complete lack of imagination. Yuri immediately shouted in protest, indignantly calling Frank disgusting for not giving this cute creature a real name. Without a name, the rabbit would be pathetic. Frank was still turning over the idea of using it for spare food or dinner in his head, and this only scared Yuri more, who resolutely objected. The girl was unyielding. She would not allow anyone to eat her little friend. Eventually, Frank gave in and told Yuri to name it herself. She blinked in surprise and asked if she really had the right to do so, while the pink rabbit squeaked QQ and cutely wriggled in Frank's hands. Yuri realized that the rabbit would not obey until Frank gave it a name, so she asked Argo to seriously think about it. Argo just laughed and threw out frivolous options like Pink or Niku, which made Yuri freeze. Then she shouted at him to be more serious. In another corner, Noir and the pink rabbit were peacefully getting acquainted under Amanda's warm gaze. Yuri sat next to her and watched as the two little friends played. And joy spread in her heart. The creature's cuteness seemed to completely dispel the expedition's tension. Amanda looked tenderly at Yuri and quietly delighted in this happy moment with that sweet, gentle girl, joked that it was hard to believe how such a burly guy like Frank could make a pretty bunny so attached. Yuri curiously asked Amanda if it was true that only priests could use the healing spell. And Amanda smiled, explaining that the temple keeps this magic secret, so ordinary people cannot learn it. They did so to preserve the status and jobs of the clergy. When Yuri laughed and called it her secret technique, Amanda just smiled and noted that Yuri was already a bit special, so it was nothing surprising. Finally, she asked if Yuri had already decided on a name for the rabbit, and Yuri excitedly said that she overheard Frank whispering Luan Ryuan, which made her exclaim with delight that it was an incredibly cool name, and she never would have thought Frank had such taste, although in reality, it was just the name of a rabbit dish he mentioned in the store. Yuri took it positively and loudly thanked Frank, while Marshall simply froze in embarrassment. The mood became serious when Yuri asked Amanda about the results of the monster investigation. Tired Amanda confirmed that the trend was obvious. The number of goblins, and especially dark panthers, had unusually increased compared to before. Yuri froze at the mention of dark panthers. After all, Noir belonged to this species. Amanda quietly whispered that Captain Leon suspected. The king of monsters of this uprising might be an adult dark panther, and Yuri watched with growing anxiety as Noir naively licked his fur. Amanda sternly warned, if that happens, Noir might be declared dangerous and they would have to deal with him for the protection of people. She insisted that no potentially dangerous monster could be allowed near Yuri, and the very word deal with squeezed Yuri's heart with fear for the future of her little friend. Tears filled Yuri's eyes. She could not imagine Noir attacking people or suffering a tragic fate, and she resolutely exclaimed that nothing was decided yet. No one could be sure what kind of creature the king of monsters would become, because she believed. Gentle, loving Noir would never hurt anyone. Amanda, seeing Yuri's determination, simply hugged her and quietly comforted her. At that moment, Noir woke up and snuggled up to Yuri, as if sensing his mistress's sadness, and Amanda smiled, saying that probably Noir woke up to advise Yuri to rest and regain strength again. Yuri gently stroked Noir and quietly, as if in her heart, whispered his name. She began to doubt Amanda's terrible assumptions. If the king of monsters really came from dark panthers and led all the monsters against people, would Noir stay by her side as he does now? Sadness and hope burned in Yuri's eyes as she looked at her little friend, and she silently prayed that their friendship would be strong enough to overcome all species boundaries and relentless fate. Yuri smiled with relief seeing Noir basking, and in her soul called Noir a little clingy one. Thinking that although the future was unknown, now they could only strengthen their bond, she hugged Noir tightly and quietly promised that they would always be together. And then Amanda asked Yuri to go to sleep because it was already late. The girl obeyed without hesitation and together with Amanda fell into a deep sleep in the tent. And somewhere at the very edge of the forest darkness still hung, from which strange sounds began to come, as if whispering that the short respite was about to end. Suddenly a panicked messenger ran into the camp and, gasping for breath, shouted to Captain Leon. The village of Twilight is under fierce attack and is in mortal danger. Leon stood with crossed arms, and a stern expression. He realized that trouble had started earlier than he expected. The messenger knight shouted that the demon uprising had officially broken out, and the whole camp froze. Yuri was still sound asleep, unaware that disaster had truly come, and her path to fight for this land had entered a much harsher phase. Yuri woke up in the tent and sleepily rubbed her eyes. It seemed to her that something was wrong outside. She opened the flap and saw the knights bustling, urgently passing news to each other with anxious faces. Yuri wondered if something serious had happened while she was asleep. Just at that moment, Amanda approached with a serious expression and called her by name, sharply pulling her out of her reverie. Embarrassed, Yuri apologized to Amanda, fearing she had overslept during the crisis. And Amanda gently said that everything was fine, then knelt down to meet Yuri's gaze, firmly grabbed her by the shoulders with deep anxiety and revealed the shocking truth. The demon rebellion had started much earlier than they expected. Yuri shouted in surprise. He remembered that according to the usual cycle, the disaster should have happened in another month. Amanda whispered in a quiet voice that this time everything was abnormal and the disaster seemed to be rapidly accelerating. She said that in the 10-year cycle they were supposed to have 2 years for preparation, but the calamity came earlier than even the most experienced had predicted. Amanda told that at dawn, a pack of battle wolves attacked the village near the fortress. The survivors fled here and begged for help, and she added that the night squad would set out immediately to assist that village. Amanda asked Yuri to cover the entire formation with a wide protective spell to increase the knight's chances of survival. Yuri instantly agreed, assuring she could do it, but suddenly froze. She understood something. At that moment, Captain Leon stepped forward and decisively ordered Yuri to immediately return to the island fortress for her safety. He said that from here they would split into two groups. One would return to the fortress. The other would move forward to the village of Twilight to fight. Yuri roared in protest against Leon's order. He insisted he would go with everyone to fight in the Twilight. Leon sternly cut him off, saying it was too dangerous there, and ordered Shia to return to the fortress. Yuri clenched her fists and explained. Her wide area protective magic lasts only 30 minutes, so if she did not go with them, the spell would disappear the moment they met the enemy, and boldly added that her life motto was better to do and regret than to do nothing at all and then regret. Yuri's fiery shout caught Leon, Amanda, and Argo frozen in surprise at the determination of the little girl. After a few stunned seconds, she awkwardly asked if she would really regret it if she went with them, and this eased the tension, making the scene a bit comical. Argo put his hand to his forehead and sighed, and Amanda smiled, touched by her sweetness and courage. Leon crossed his arms, stared at Yuri for a long time, then exhaled and muttered that she was impossible. Leon realized. Although he initially asked Yuri to stay in the fortress for safety, time was short, so it was best for her to go with them and support them from the rear, and Yuri was glad they allowed her to join the rescue mission. She sat on a tree root and carefully checked the things in her bag. Yuri told herself that she did not want to fight monsters head-on, but she was insanely eager to help with healing and supportive magic. So she enthusiastically formed a team in the system with Leon, Argo, and Amanda, and felt more confident preparing a potion to restore MP. Yuri gathered her willpower and promised not to waver now the lives of the inhabitants of the town of Twilight depended on them. She walked with a determined look, although her little legs still trembled from the scale of the upcoming battle, and a dress sewn by Jorg flashed through her memory, protective but too conspicuous for mountain combat. She decided to open the equipment menu to see if she had a more suitable protective item, and her eyes widened in surprise when a special item appeared. There Yuri was stunned to see in the menu an ultra-rare item called the Moonlight Staff, which in the game Illusia Online could only be obtained in the New Year's luck draw, and this super powerful artifact increased the power of offensive spells by 1.5 times and was owned by only a few players. But when she excitedly pulled it out, she discovered with horror that it was actually called the Gecko Staff. It looked the same on the outside but was much weaker because it was just a low-level item for level 1. Yuri grabbed her head and screamed at this terrible mistake, silently wishing it was the real staff that would boost her confidence. But in the end, she reluctantly accepted reality and repeated to herself that a level 1 weapon was still better than going into battle empty-handed. Yuri began to take the item out of her virtual bag, and immediately a large wooden staff grew out of the small pouch on her hip. She had to grab it with both hands and, letting out a groan, strained to pull out the heavy weapon. The head of the staff wrapped around a magical sphere that seemed gigantic next to Yuri's tiny figure, and it looked quite comical, so her eyes widened in surprise. But though struggling, she held the staff with a determined expression on her face, preparing to set off. Knights Argo and Amanda, who stood nearby, were equally stunned and shouted in unison, "What?" And when the giant staff suddenly appeared out of nowhere, Amanda gaped in surprise and kept asking where Yuri got that thing, while Yuri could only smile awkwardly and to hide the system's secret made up that her shoulder bag, although it looked small, had plenty of space inside. That absurd but strangely convincing answer stunned both knights. They froze speechless and did not know what to say. So eventually Amanda decided to put the matter aside and focus on moving, because the Knight Squad had to move immediately. The Knight Squad of the Isla Fortress began a lightning march toward the Twilight under the leadership of Leon and veteran knights. Yuri sat in front on Argo to be safe and not fall behind. The riders thundered through forests and plains in an unstoppable rush, and the gleam of the armor flying painted a scene both heroic and tense. Yuri clung to the horse's neck and looked around anxiously as they approached the battlefield. From afar, the village of Twilight appeared, and columns of smoke testified to the monster's destruction. Captain Leon raised his hand, ordered the team to stop at the edge of the village, and announced that they would storm it immediately, then turned and called Yuri to prepare the planned magical support. Yuri gripped her wooden gecko staff and loudly replied, "Yes," her heart pounding wildly, while Leon stood ahead with a cold gaze, ready for any danger to protect the people. Yuri took a deep breath, focused all her mana into the staff, and shouted the skill name Area Protect Shield. And immediately a blinding light exploded from the magical sphere, enveloping the surrounding knights. All froze in awe as magical circles and shield symbols began to swirl around their bodies. Leon identified this as rare magic that enhances external objects and emphasized to everyone that the protective layers overlapped, so they needed to be used to the fullest. And Yuri's timely support raised the entire squad's fighting spirit higher than ever before. Amanda knelt and quickly explained the battle plan to Yuri. Leon would lead the assault, and Yuri would stay behind with her and Argo, keeping a distance so her healing spells could reach the captain but at the same time be safe. And Amanda added reassuringly, "Don't worry, Argo and I will be nearby and cover you from monsters." Yuri nodded but did not take her eyes off the village under threat. Suddenly, eerie howls of a pack of battle wolves rolled over the rooftops, and she shuddered as she realized that the fight for life and death had truly begun. At the sharpest moment, Captain Leon dramatically raised his sword upward and shouted a fiery call to all the knights of the Kingdom of Ares. From now on, they would become unshakable shields protecting people from the onslaught of savage monsters. He declared that their blades would become edges of death, punishing anyone who threatened the peace of Dask. Leon's call ignited the courage of the knights, and they all drew their swords, shouting a single battle cry and swearing an oath to fight. To Leon's powerful shout, forward. The knight squad rushed into the village. The ground slightly trembled. Yuria gripped her wooden staff and shouted encouraging words to drive away the fear creeping into her thoughts. And as soon as they burst inside, they were struck by the sight a swarm of black battle wolves with burning red eyes prowling everywhere in search of prey. The monstrous wolves bared teeth sharp as blades, drooled, and growled threateningly at the coming night, and the peaceful air of the village turned into a bloody battlefield full of terrible roars. Yuria pressed behind Amanda when she saw the terrible scale of the horde surrounding the village, and covering her mouth in fear, watched as dozens of battle wolves prowled near the houses and emitted eerie howls to call their pack. The cruelty of reality caught Yuria by surprise. The 19-year-old found herself in the body of an 8-year-old. It was nothing like anything she had experienced in the game. The crazed wolves lunged at the knights, foreshadowing an inevitable bloody clash. Captain Leon stood tall at the front with a cold gaze and a two-handed sword ready. With one powerful lightning-fast strike, he sent an incoming battle wolf flying into the air, stunning it. Seeing this, the other knights felt their fighting spirit rise and in unison called to advance after the captain. The terrifying wolves bared their fangs and growled cruelly at their fallen comrades, but could not stop the knights charging forward. Leon bravely rushed into the attack, carving a bloody path straight through the horde besieging the village. The knights of Isla Forte surged forward in a continuous assault, creating a dramatic hand-to-hand combat, their battle cries tearing through the air. Each was focused to the limit, swinging swords, repelling relentless attacks of the war wolves. One wolf jumped to latch on and kill, but its throat was pierced by a precise sword strike and blood spattered everywhere. While Yuria stood behind and watched the true cruelty of battle with horror, she saw monster bodies scattered on the ground and felt the suffocating pressure of this life-and-death duel. After repelling the first wave, Leon ordered to disperse and search for survivors, warning everyone to be very careful. Battle wolves could still be hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. Amanda quickly approached, took Yuria's hand, and asked if she was okay after what she had seen. Yuria shyly lowered her head and admitted that she was actually not well. The metallic smell of blood and the sounds of tearing from the monsters still haunted her mind, and she realized this was the harsh truth of war that no game could truly convey. Amanda looked at Yuria with gentle, understanding eyes. She knew these scenes were too heavy for a child. She calmed and praised her for holding herself together, not crying or fainting from fear. Yuria raised her moist eyes and quietly thanked her, and this acknowledgement gave her the courage to continue. She decided to do everything she could to help, not stand paralyzed by fear, when suddenly Argo shouted Amanda's name in panic, a sign that a new danger was approaching. From the bushes burst a huge battle wolf with strange blue turquoise fur and lunged at Amanda. Its strike was so powerful that she had to hold her ground, and she gasped in surprise seeing this unusual fur and understood. This was not an ordinary wolf, but an extremely dangerous mutant with strength far exceeding that of its relatives. Yuri, next to her, also with wide eyes of horror, stared at the oppressive figure of the monster. The appearance of this mutant strain drove the entire unit into an extremely dangerous and threatening situation. The mutant battle wolf bared sharp, blade-like teeth and let out a growl that made the bones tremble. Amanda gripped her sword tighter and, grinding her teeth in anxiety, recognized the danger standing before her. The monster suddenly accelerated and launched lightning-fast attacks, which Amanda barely dodged. The mutant's agility and strength made even the knight seem to sweat from tension. Yuri stood behind, clutching the gecko staff and trembling as she watched Amanda struggle to fend off the attacks. After a tense exchange of words, Amanda realized the creature was targeting her specifically and shouted at Argo to quickly take Yuri to safety. Wolf claws slashed her arm, blood flowed in a stream, and she plunged her sword into the ground to steady herself. Argo rushed forward to cover Yuri from the monster, while watching what the comrades were doing, and at that moment, a signal horn sounded from the Villagia sign that Leon and the rest of the knights were in trouble or urgently needed help. Argo shouted to Amanda to hold on until Captain Leon returned to help, then sharply turned to Yuri and demanded an immediate healing to cure Amanda's wounds. And Yuri, shaken by the urgency of the situation, instantly focused all of Herman's energy into a sphere on the wooden staff. The girl shouted the skill name healed towards Amanda, and warm light enveloped the knight wounds. But from the bushes behind them surged a horde of fierce goblins, making the encircling ring thicker and scarier than ever. Cruel goblins rushed from all sides, and Argo cried out in horror as he realized they were completely surrounded. Yuri gripped the magic staff in deep anxiety, and Amanda was still struggling, trying to get up after the mutant wolf's attack. Argo looked at Amanda with worried eyes and asked if she could still fight. Amanda did not respond with words. Her determination spoke with a steely gaze. She gripped her sword tighter and prepared for another bloody clash to protect Yuri and their comrades. Amanda bravely declared she would show these monsters the true power of a knight from the island fortress, stepped forward to the mutated battle wolf and the snarling horde of goblins. The giant blue wolf opened its jaws with razor-sharp fangs and let out a terrible roar, the sign of the next attack. And although the pain still bit her, Amanda stood firm before the onslaught, the air seeming to thicken before the clash. The mutant battle wolf lunged like a blue whirlpool, causing Yuri to panic and shout, "Amanda!" Immediately, Amanda poured all her mana into the sword and shouted the technique's name, Jin Rayhaden Flame Ring Twin Strike. The fierce flame flared up, engulfed the blade, and turned it into a blazing arc that tore through the air. A powerful slash carrying the terrible heat of fire, aimed straight at the beast charging in attack, and tongues of flame illuminated the dark battlefield. Amanda's blazing strike hit the target and threw the mutant battle wolf into the air amid painful growls. But the beast proved strangely resilient. It quickly flipped in the air and lunged in fierce jumps, trying to retaliate. Amanda had to constantly swing her sword to hold back the fury of the blue wolf, while simultaneously watching the goblins sneaking up from behind. Yuri stood in the corner of the square, tense and focused, silently praying that Amanda would handle this dangerous attack. She trembled, clutching the gecko staff and waiting for the moment to help. Noticing that Amanda was exhausting and cornered by the beast, Yuri poured all her mana into the staff and shouted, "Amanda-san, heal." A warm restorative beam burst from the magical staff, enveloping Amanda's body and instantly healing her wounds and restoring her strength. Amanda exclaimed in surprise, feeling a new surge of strength, and instantly delivered the decisive blow. Her blazing sword sliced the mutant battle wolf lengthwise, and it completely collapsed. Argo, standing nearby, was stunned by the effective cooperation of Yuri and Amanda. The mutant battle wolf fiercely blazed and dispersed into black smoke after Amanda's decisive strike. She was breathing heavily and plunged her sword into the ground to steady herself, while the goblins around, seeing their fallen leader, panicked and fled. Amanda smiled with relief. The tense battle was finally over. Argo jumped up and shouted, "We did it," and rushed to them. Yuri cried with happiness and, feeling incredible relief after crossing the boundary between life and death, called out Amanda's name. Yuri rushed to Amanda with a worried face, constantly asking if anything else hurt. She pressed her small hands to Amanda's body, checking for injuries, and even the knight laughed at her excessive care, while Amanda gently said that everything was fine and Yuri's magic had completely healed her wounds. Argo stood behind and smiled at the warm reunion, but suddenly remembered the main mission and looked toward the village center, where the noise had not yet subsided. Amanda tightly hugged Yuri and calmed her, trying to dispel the residual fear in her eyes, then sincerely thanked Yuri, saying that without timely treatment she would have been in danger. Yuri rested her head on Amanda's shoulder and burst into tears of relief, because for a moment it became calmer. At that moment, Captain Leon and reinforcements appeared after clearing another area of monsters. He approached with a stern face, but relief was reflected in his eyes when he saw that everyone was safe. Leon asked Argo about the goblins, and he said they fled immediately after killing the mutant battle wolf. He looked at the remains of the vanished blue wolf and thought that the monsters seemed to have started mutating strangely and unexpectedly. Leon felt uneasy. The Monster King had still not appeared and mutants were already approaching the edge of the forest. And when Yuri quietly inquired about the condition of the villagers, Leon fell silent with a sad look. This chilling silence squeezed the girl's heart because she realized that not everyone was so lucky. Leon quietly sighed and admitted that with the appearance of mutant strains, it would be extremely difficult to protect the entire village. Yuri exclaimed in shock, "It can't be," when she realized how cruelly this disaster was hitting the innocent. Leon ordered Amanda to immediately take Yuri to the island fortress, while he and the others stayed to clean up the aftermath. Amanda obeyed, lifted Yuri onto her horse and set off back, while the girl, looking back at the twilight village covered in smoke and flames, silently promised herself with a heavy heart to become stronger so as never to see such painful scenes again. That night Yuri dreamed a horror. Bloody battle scenes spun again in her head. She saw how the wolves of war surrounded and mercilessly attacked, and in her dreams she felt tiny and lonely amid the dark, advancing new reality. Tears rolled down the cheeks of the 8-year-old girl, as she had to admit that she had left the blood-soaked battlefield. And the contrast between the soul of a 19-year-old and the child's body only sharpened her pain. Yuri suddenly woke up when the morning light shone into the simple wooden room of the Isle fortress. Sat pale, with eyes still clouded from sadness after a sleepless night, and looking around the corners of the modest room, realized that apparently everyone had already started work early. She hid her face in her little hands and told herself, no matter how terrible that dream was, she had to be stronger. After crying her fill, she felt a little better, although the nightmare about the terrible pack of wolves had not completely disappeared yet. Yuri suddenly remembered how Amanda comforted her last night until she fell asleep, and she blushed at the memory of sobbing like a real child in the arms of the kind sister. Yuri blamed herself because although her soul was adult, her thoughts and feelings became childish because of this 8-year-old body. She tousled her hair in front of the mirror, embarrassed and refusing to admit that truth, put on her little shoes, and decided to keep up the appearance of a wise person rather than remain a tearful child. To check her status, Yuri immediately entered the system command status open, and a bright information panel flashed before her. She froze in surprise. Her level had jumped to LV10, HP and MP had significantly increased, and a mysterious new title appeared nearby: Maiden Hubikin's Fortune. Yuri exclaimed with joy when she realized that even without direct combat, participation in the party and healing spells had brought her a huge amount of experience, and she was delighted and quietly grateful that the game mechanics still worked. Yuri carefully studied the new status panel and felt deep satisfaction from her own breakthroughs. She quietly thought that she was somewhat guilty for gaining experience without risking herself, but this was a deserved reward for her efforts. Then she noticed a new skill line: Tamer level 1, and wondered what she could do. Suddenly she remembered Noir and the good knight friends who always protected her, smiled, and decided to learn more about this new skill to be more useful to the fortress. Yuri, reading about the Tamer skill, muttered and understood that it allows taming a monster and turning it into a loyal companion. She realized that the terrible experiment with the Goblin earlier was not in vain, but became the spark that awakened this skill. And seeing Noir innocently playing at her feet, Yuri pondered how to raise the Tamer level, whether caring for the creature or fighting together would strengthen their bond. And these new questions drove her into deep reflection. Later, during breakfast with Frank in the kitchen of the Izov fortress, she curiously asked if there was magic in this world that could control monsters, which caused the god of logistics to freeze with a cup of tea in surprise. And Frank shook his head and replied that he had never heard of such magic, and that if it existed, it would be an extremely rare skill. Yuri awkwardly laughed and thought to herself that it would be interesting to look at Frank's status panel. Frank advised Yuri, if she wants to level up this skill, she should try to tame many monsters at once to find its limits. Suddenly, Frank jokingly changed his tone and suggested Yuri try to tame him to see if it would work. This caused the girl to protest fiercely. "Don't joke like that." And she insisted that she would use this skill only on real monsters. Frank burst into loud laughter and noted that Yuri looked much fresher and more energetic than that morning. The girl smiled with relief and sincerely thanked Frank for always taking care of her. And Yuri later asked if the demon uprising disaster would really end when the Monster King was defeated. Frank pondered and confirmed that the fierce cruelty of the monsters would surely subside once their leader was killed. Yuri sighed with relief and silently prayed for the Monster King to appear quickly and end this suffering. Frank looked at her seriously and said he was worried about how creatures like Noir would suffer if the disaster reached its peak. Suddenly, Yuri became anxious for her little friend, and she vowed to protect him at any cost. At that moment, Frank reached out and made a teasing gesture that caught Yuri by surprise. Suddenly, Frank squeezed Yuri's nose hard. She screamed in pain and struggled helplessly. He joked that such a grown-up, worried expression did not suit a child. One must live carefree. Yuri indignantly sobbed and sweetly called Frank offended, and the god of logistics just laughed and ruffled her hair, trying to calm her. Frank delivered good news. Reinforcements from the capital and adventure guilds would soon arrive at the fortress, so Yuri could completely relax. Yuri rejoiced at the mention of adventurers, but Frank realistically added that when they came, the dishes at the fortress would definitely become much more luxurious, and the girls froze at his gourmet soul. The scene opened with a large map of the Kingdom of Ares, and a voice explaining this land is protected by 3 great knight orders. The footage showed heavily armed knights representing the Order of the Royal Guard, which protects the monarchy, and the Royal Knights, responsible for guarding all borders. Each army radiated pride and the heavy burden to protect the peace of the people. The story showed a border knight squad guarding distant lands. The island fortress was among them. When the demon uprising broke out, the royal troops sent reinforcements, and the fortress came alive like never before. Yuri took Noir for a walk down the corridor and silently noticed that suddenly there were more knights in the dormitory, and the space seemed to narrow, becoming cramped. As she walked, Yuri heard a chun and flinched when the same white bird suddenly flew past her head. She called out Argo's name, seeing him in the distance with a calm expression. The white bird circled once and gently landed on the young knight's shoulder, surprising Yuri by how familiar this creature was with humans. Yuri ran up to Argo in panic to ask what strange creature was on his shoulder. Argo smiled and explained that it was the magical bird Mashu, asked Yuri to watch closely, and the bird instantly created a sparkling white fluffy ball in his palm. Yuri opened her eyes wide and screamed in amazement, understanding nothing, while Argo explained that this was a mystical mail service in this world. Argo kindly explained that this magical bird is called a puffball, and it can transform letters written on magical paper into soft fluffy balls for sending over long distances. But since this takes time, people usually insert magical stones into the birds to make them fly faster. Yuri looked excitedly at the shimmering magical stone in her hand and asked if she could ask Amanda about it, and Argo agreed and told her to try to find Amanda. When she calmed down to learn more, Argo's face became serious. He had read the contents of the letters and said that there was still no decisive new information about the disaster. Sighing, he added that the night reports show the number of monsters is increasing and their overflow is only a matter of time. Seeing Argo, all covered in important papers, Yuri thought to herself that he really works hard as the deputy commander of the fortress, so she quietly led Noir away so as not to disturb him. Walking near the fortress, Yuri suddenly met a young man smiling and calling her by name. She exclaimed with joy, recognizing Simon, who was accompanied by a group of people with an extremely noticeable appearance. And when Simon introduced them as the famous party of S-rank adventurers called Dawn Seekers, Yuri was deeply impressed to learn that they were extremely famous in the world of Alyosha. Yuri began to carefully examine each one and recognized Gazard, a swordsman from the dwarf clan with characteristic blue-gray skin, like a former master blacksmith. Then there was the beast-like warrior Vilna, who seemed cold and indifferent, but as soon as she noticed Noir, she wildly wagged her tail, which made the girl think that she really liked cute things. The beautiful elf Nalaru was an influential sorceress with an unknown lifespan, and finally Simon appeared, Frank's apprentice, the one who united everyone into a formidable team of adventurers. Simon explained to Yuri that adventurers mostly camp outside the fortress, and that after many conversations and exchanges of information within their circle, the group had become very close. Suddenly he looked around and asked Yuri if she had seen Frank, and the girl quickly pointed to the yard, saying she had just seen him pass by. Simon thanked her with a smile and led the squad to look for the mentor, while meanwhile the beast warrior Vilna froze and looked at Yuri with such a sharp gaze that the girl shuddered. Yuri stared blankly, not understanding what she was looking at, and the cat Noir also looked at the beast woman with interest. Simon loudly called Vilna and urged her. The group was waiting. Vilna finally looked away and silently followed her comrades, quietly waving to Yuri, and Yuri watched their backs and wondered if Vilna wanted to touch Noir, because there was some strange longing in her gaze. In Yuri's mind flashed the thought that although many adventurers had arrived as reinforcements, no player from Alyosha was visible online. She felt a little downhearted and disappointed because she once hoped to find others who were also transported here, and she sighed bitterly, telling herself that maybe this world really was now her only reality. Yuri silently stood in the fortress yard and raised her eyes to the fluffy magical bird circling in the endless sky. She saw strips of magical light flickering through the air, signals of important news between fortresses. The story said that the number of monsters was rapidly increasing every day, forcing knights and adventurers to closely coordinate to exterminate them. And against the backdrop of growing tension in the kingdom, the news everyone feared finally arrived about a turning point. They opened the magical postal message. It announced that the king of monsters had officially appeared at the border. A goblin who mutated and became an incredibly powerful being, the Goblin King. Yuri sat opposite Frank in a small room and enthusiastically reported on preparations for the upcoming sortie. Frank kindly looked at him and asked if Noir had noticed anything strange. She smiled and assured that both Noir and the pink moon rabbit were cheerful and behaving as usual. Frank added that although the king of monsters had appeared, it seemed that so far it had not harmed the monsters tamed by Yuri. Frank sternly warned Yuri, although everything seems calm now, one must not relax. Approaching the territory of the king of monsters could ruin everything. Yuri anxiously asked if Frank also planned to take the rabbit Lewin to the upcoming battle, and Frank awkwardly scratched his head and admitted that he intended to leave Lewin behind. But the little rabbit fiercely resisted and stubbornly insisted on going to protect his master. He sighed and confessed that he did not expect the bond between him and the rabbit to become so deep in such a short time. While Yuri watched as Frank gently stroked Lewin's head, laughed brightly, and joked that Lewin loves Frank because he is truly very gentle. Frank blushed at Yuri's compliment and, unexpectedly pinching her nose, teased that such a tiny thing like her dared to speak so boldly. And Yuri sweetly protested, waved her hands, and shouted that she was not tiny, which immediately lightened the atmosphere. Frank became serious again and said that if the enemy is the king of goblins, it is still luckier than dealing with the king of the undead, explaining that although he is the king of monsters, his power is usually not too insurmountable. Yuri smiled with relief and exclaimed that the opponent is not the infamous Dark Panther or the Horned Hair King, and Frank smiled in response but felt a bit exposed because she saw through him, so he awkwardly covered his mouth and cleared his throat. Frank turned to Yuri to learn about the plan for defensive magical support before the upcoming assault, and to ensure the safety of the knight. Yuri confidently stated that she would stay in the rear and cast mass spells to support the comrades on the front line as much as possible, but hesitated and admitted that she would also like to use offensive magic. But Argo had previously warned her not to stand out on the battlefield. Frank nodded and explained that a child with incredible magic would instantly attract the attention of the powerful and create problems. Yuri seriously pondered, felt the wisdom of his words, and decided to follow the plan. Frank stroked her head, smiled encouragingly, and ordered her to entrust matters to the adults and focus on restoring Commander Leon's health. Yuri bent down to look at Noir, who was curled up at her feet, then gently picked him up and pressed him to herself to feel the warmth. She whispered to Noir that they would both give all their strength in the upcoming important battle, and Noir, as if understanding, trustingly rubbed his head against Yuri, showing that their friendship was unbreakable. The scene changed. The Knights of Isel saddled their horses and burst forward at great speed, and Commander Leon, strict in posture and with a determined look, led the troops to the front. The thunder of hooves on dry ground created a sense of urgency and fierce fighting spirit. The battle map appeared, showing how the march of the King of Goblins relentlessly devours villages near the enchanted forest and advances on the village of Kairos. Yuri sat in front of the knight Argo on horseback and silently watched the tense column of the army. She quietly felt the pressure and anxiety from the surrounding knights, although no one spoke along the way. Yuri clutched her white cloak and worried whether they would manage to save the next village from the monster's claws, so she decided to get there as soon as possible to prevent casualties among the innocent inhabitants. The shout faster echoed through the air, urging the entire squad to hurry. Yuri, lost in thought, suddenly froze and asked Argo if he also heard some strange sound. Argo listened carefully, but at first only felt a slight trembling of the ground like a distant earthquake. Yuri closed her eyes to feel better and realized with horror that the underground rumblings were becoming louder and stronger than ever. She opened her eyes wide in fear and asked Argo what this strange, rhythmic rumble was. Yuri and Argo froze as a terrible sight unfolded before them. A vast plain turned into a gray-black sea, thousands of creatures rolled in a stream, and Yuri screamed in horror, recognizing that the entire enemy force was goblins, so many that they covered the ground like a carpet, and she did not understand how the night squad could hold back such a huge army of monsters. This raised a pensive question: why are kings of monsters born, while below chaotic scenes unfolded? A horde of goblins rushed like a tidal wave to storm the fortress Cirrus. The knights gathered there and fought desperately, holding back the fierce onslaught of monsters. Argo recognized the defensive squad as curious garrison knights, and Yuri anxiously did not take her eyes off their swords cutting through the air in a tight circle. Commander Leon sat high in the saddle and grimly ordered the entire squad not to retreat so he could carve a bloody path. He gathered himself, uttered a spell, and summoned fire and wind to converge on the blade of his two-handed sword. Suddenly, a dazzling flash burst forth. The sword was wrapped in blazing tongues of flame and mighty whirlwinds. Yuri opened her eyes in admiration and silently marveled at the double effect of Leon's magic, realizing he was a true hero. Yuri did not stand aside either, firmly gripping her gecko staff. She infused mana to strengthen the army and shouted the spell name Area Protect Shield, summoning shimmering protective circles that enveloped the knights, adventurers, and her two little friends Noir and Lewin. Thanks to Yuri's magical shields, the knights felt a surge of strength and boldly charged straight into the advancing horde of fierce goblins. After Yuri cast the mass spell, she quickly took a potion to restore MP and with one gulp regained her combat energy. At that moment, a large hand of a bearded man suddenly lifted her, and he warned her to be careful. Leon called the man Jorg and asked him to look after Yuri. The girl was stunned. It was the same Jorg who secretly adored Amanda and whose brave appearance was exactly as described. The battle erupted fiercely as Commander Leon led the knights into the very heart of the goblin packs. His fiery strikes threw back monsters and carved a bloody trail across the battlefield. Although there were countless goblins, before the stunning power of the brilliant magical swordsman they began to panic, and Leon with a cold, sharp gaze relentlessly swung his sword, trying to lift the siege from the fortress Kairos. Other knights picked up the battle cry and followed the commander. Amanda led another group, swung her sword and cut down goblins trying to sneak up from the rear, and a clear spell sounded in the air, summoning the power of wind arrows from the void. It was Selena who focused her spirit to release a long-range magical strike and break the horde blocking the army's path. Selena released the wind spear, which tore through the enemy formation with incredible force, and the knights erupted in applause. Magical reinforcements arrived just in time. Jorg noticed that the squad of mages had finally caught up with the marching knights, but Yuri became worried when she saw that the goblins did not seem to have decreased, and decided to ignore the warning not to stand out. She raised her staff and summoned a fireball to destroy the approaching monsters. Yuri continuously threw burning fireballs at the horde of goblins, but soon realized that this way it would never end piece by piece. She squeezed her eyes shut and shouted angrily that it was endless. Yuri decided to use a more powerful spell and shouted a mid-level spell, Fire Crush. At the tip of her wooden staff, a giant ball of fire began to gather, preparing to strike from above, and the goblins below raised their eyes wide and frightened. A terrible magical explosion erupted in the center of the enemy formation, forming a blinding pillar of light that threw the goblins away. And Yuri froze in horror when she realized she had accidentally unleashed too powerful an attack. Jorg and the surrounding knights froze at that huge destruction and rushed to check if any of their comrades were caught in the explosion. The girl awkwardly apologized, and Jorg only broke into a sweat, realized that the strength of this quiet girl was truly no joke. Through choking smoke and dust finally emerged the figure of the king of monsters, and Jorg raised a cry of alarm. A gigantic goblin with a fierce face, his head wrapped in many layers of cloth like a crown, and around his neck a necklace of savage fangs. It was the Goblin King, a giant looming and roaring orders to his servants, and Yuri trembled, looking at this mutated creature and feeling the terrible dark pressure emanating from his muscular body. Yuri leaned down to look at Noir. The cat nestled in her cloak and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. He was calm and showed no hostile intentions, so she sighed with relief, thinking how lucky Noir was that the King of Monsters' call had no effect on him. At that moment, Commander Leon shouted to the entire squad. Look to the rear, another horde is already rushing, and suddenly from the darkness emerged a pack of black panthers with shining eyes and razor-sharp fangs, blocking the retreat at night. The battle flared up. The black panthers charged at the knights, knocking many riders off their horses and inflicting severe wounds, so Leon loudly ordered the wounded to retreat immediately to preserve their strength. Yuri, noticing that the situation was becoming unfavorable, raised her staff and called Heal Wind. A gentle green light spread across the battlefield, instantly healing the night wounds and giving everyone strength and courage to continue fighting. Frank rode at full speed and shouted that the rate of magical regeneration could not keep up with the rapid onslaught of enemies, and warned Yuri not to be reckless. This horde was abnormally large. Yuri anxiously asked Frank about his experience in fighting previous monster outbreaks. She thought that if people needed to rest, and goblins and black panthers kept attacking non-stop, then the Kira's fortress would inevitably fall. While goblins and black panthers frantically rushed forward amid heart-wrenching screams, Yuri pondered and asked Frank why the Goblin King was leading his army out of the forest to attack humans, and why this disaster kept repeating over and over. Frank thoughtfully, with sadness in his voice, replied that the gods wanted to test the will and strength of humanity. Yuri froze at that philosophical and religious answer, and the darkness of the forest seemed to engulf the village's hope. While Yuri was lost in thoughts about God's trial, a huge black panther suddenly leapt up to pounce on her from behind. At that dangerous moment, little Noir bravely jumped out of the cloak, bared his teeth, and growled to confront the attacker. The black panther froze for a moment at the bravery of the little creature, but still swiped its claws, and Yuri screamed in horror, Noir, seeing her little cat thrown back and flying right into the middle. In the very thicket of a fierce pack of panthers, the panther bit Noir and lifted her into the air, which drove Yuri to despair. She helplessly reached out her hand and tearfully called the name of her little friend, watching her disappear behind the thick bushes. Panthers roared around as if celebrating victory, and this roar squeezed Yuri's heart painfully. She let out a strangled scream, Noir. While Leon and the other knights were still desperately repelling attacks from all sides, Yuri panicked and kept whispering what to do to save Noir, who was trapped in a circle of beasts, and hastily raising her staff, cast the heal spell from afar, hoping the healing light would keep Noir alive. Suddenly, a powerful surge of spiritual energy burst forth, and from among the panthers emerged a huge beast with shiny raven-black fur and stern eyes radiating an astonishing presence. Yuri's eyes widened. She screamed in amazement, couldn't believe that her little cat had suddenly right before her turned into a giant, brave black panther.